Time doesn't erase murder. It just hides it better. They said the case was closed. They said no one was watching. But someone always is. This is Santana True Crime.
Welcome to Santana True Crime. Tonight's guest is a man whose life changed forever in a matter of seconds. In 1992, Harris County Sheriff's Deputy Kent McGowen was serving an arrest warrant when a woman named Susan White was shot and killed. What followed was an investigation, a criminal trial, a conviction, and years spent behind bars. More than 3 decades later, the case continues to generate debate among those who have studied the facts and evidence. Was this a deliberate act, a tragic accident, or a case where the justice system got it wrong? Tonight, we're speaking directly with the man at the center of one of the most controversial officer-involved shootings cases in Texas history. We'll discuss the events leading up to the shooting, what happened that day, the investigation, the trial, years spent in prison, and what it was like trying to rebuild his life after losing nearly everything. This isn't a conversation about headlines or rumors. It's an opportunity to hear directly from Kent McGowen about the case that changed his life forever. Kent, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'd like to get the story out there, the true story, finally.
You know, when I first heard your name and when we were talking on social media for a little bit, if you do a quick Google search, you sound like a terrible person. And maybe I'm wrong, but I'm glad that we're taking this opportunity to hear from you and to get your side of it. I wanted to start out, let's just jump right into it. About that day, can you give us a little bit of background of why you had an arrest warrant for Susan White?
Yeah, sure. I was patrolling with the Harris County Sheriff's Office in District 1, which is the northwest quadrant of Harris County, outside the incorporated city limits of Houston to the next county line. And I got it through April 3rd of 1992, signed to a beat out there. It was, for the most part, a fluent residential area. Of course, I had some rougher areas to it, surrounding it, whatnot. But they had a number of automatic weapons started showing up. And they were involved in a number of drive-by shootings in and out of homes and whatever. Of course, being a patrol deputy after a night shift, we all knew something was going on. I had a disturbance call it was just a bunch of teenagers partying, just good people, good kids. And I was out there just talking to them on the street like 1 o'clock in the morning. And one of them said, "Hey, man, this thing about these guns going around?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "It's a guy named Keith Scurra." And I said, "Man, what you gave me a description of him, say he drove a red Beretta car. And he was the one bringing the guns in and selling them." And so I said, things I made note of course, thanks for information. A couple weeks later, I stopped turned out to be my confidential informant later in the story, Michael Schaefer. And he was driving a beat up old car, absolutely didn't fit into that neighborhood. It was like maybe 2 o'clock in the morning. He rolled through a stop sign right in front of me. So I stopped him at that traffic stop. There's a lot of controversy on that traffic stop. They wrote him tickets. There were no citations issued. There'd have been a record of it. And I had a little bit of weed in the car, and it was Michael Schaefer and his girlfriend in the back. And there was another guy in the front seat, the passenger side, which turned out to be Keith Scurra, the target of the investigation. That time I didn't know who he was. He lied to me about his identification. I cut him loose with a warning, and then some more shootings started to, go around, and a lot of burglaries. This involves a burglary situation with it also. And two or three weeks later, I stopped Michael Schaefer again, on some traffic violation, and he brought up to me about the burglaries and the weapons. He started telling me that I've had a strike. Not only I'm suspect, this guy just started talking about this on a traffic stop, and he told me that some real gangbangers out of Houston or up in that area are kind of recruiting some, upper class young guys to burglarize these homes. And the gangs out of Houston were looking for mainly semi-automatic rifles, AR-15s, I think some Mini 14 showed up, whatnot, and they were the gamers out of Houston were taking them. And the deal was with these younger wannabe guys, whatever they stole the house, whatever booty they got, they sold. So I told that informant, I was suspect, like, why's this guy even telling me this, So I gave him my business card and brought back then we had beepers. Mind you, this was in 1992. So I gave him my beeper number on the back of my business card. And a couple weeks later, he said, hey, these guys they hit a house last night on a burglary and they stole, among other things, a Smith & Wesson. It was a Model 19 357 Magnum. And he asked me if I wanted to sell it. Of course, I was running all this by my lieutenant, Jay Coons, Marine, good guy, very smart, sharp guy. And the reason I was stepping over my sergeant, being a veteran, I knew about the chain of command. I've been a police officer for, several years at this point. But in between my lieutenant, I was a sergeant named Dave Ruggiero. And nobody in the district liked the guy. He hated all of us. He was from Ohio. But he was he was an utter coward. So not even getting the stories I saw that guy do. He almost let a woman die in one of my scenes because he was afraid to take action, which I stepped up and did. I didn't get along with him at all. So I was running this by Lieutenant Coons, and he said, yeah, let's go ahead and put together, come in plain clothes and let's do a buy bust on the stolen pistol. And that way we get those guys to kind of move up, the bigger fish situation, to some whoever was bigger than yet, and the rings going on. And at this point, I called the informant back and I said, hey, meet us, this area down there. And there was, I think, 3 or 4 other deputies with me. We met him. I was in plain clothes. We gave him the buy money, and they set the arrangements to meet who we were assuming was going to be Keith Skura for the buy bust. And so I got in a wrecker. I was working plain clothes. I got in a wrecker, went to the parking lot. It was a hamburger joint, and it was also right next to it was a teenage nightclub. So there's plenty of people around. Michael Schaefer, the informant, he pulls up in his car. Of course, I get there and the other deputies, they're parked around a building, to do the jump out in the patrol cars. I was in a wrecker, watching this close at hand. I gave the informant a bus signal to what to do. And I said, I observed him take the pistol and stick it in his pants, the stolen revolver, and hand over the cash to the bad guy, which was Jason Aguilar, which down the story's mother I wound up shooting 48 hours later after this. And I see the bus go down. We come in, we take everybody down. It was Keith Skura, Mike Schaefer, Jason Aguilar, and there were 2 female teenage girls there. I think they're like maybe 16. And of course, we get everybody down, get them handcuffed. We didn't handcuff the girls. They were like hysterical. We just met these guys. We don't know them, which they were lying. So I told them, admonished them, hey, you need to hang out with a better class. These guys will get you in trouble hanging out with these type of guys. So we cut these 2 teenage girls loose. And we did. They went down to a piano bar just a few blocks from where the arrest occurred. And the arrest occurred right near the residence where the shooting happened. So it was all in this very small area. But it's 2 teenage girls, when we cut them loose, they went to a restaurant and they wound up getting Jason Aguilar's mother, Susan White, the suspect. And she was married at the time. She was there with her boyfriend, who was also married at the time, not to each other, of course. They show up on the scene of the arrest. And I remember they're in a black Lincoln Town car. And I don't recall ever seeing this woman at this point. I see the town car get pull up, and the suspect, I never even said her name. The suspect got out, and Ray Valentine, her boyfriend. And he looked like something off a Joe Pesci movie. Big old guy, slick back, black hair, like a black silk suit, big red collars. But they get out, and I remember glancing over, and Deputy Scott Genovese was standing next to me. I glanced over at him. I said, wow, there's somebody's pissed off parents. And she went, and the suspect went to 4 different deputies, hollering, calling them McGowen. Well, one was Tommy Welch. At this point, I was 27 years old, 5'11", 185. Tommy Welch was probably 6'3", 300 pounds, 64 years old. She went to Chris Gush, a tall, slender, redheaded, green-eyed deputy, looked nothing like me. Went to another deputy, and then they finally they kept saying, "I'm not McGowan, he is." So I was wearing plain clothes.
Why were they calling your name?
You know what? It's been 34 years. We didn't find out because it was withheld from us illegally, along with thousands of other documents of exculpatory evidentiary documentation. There was a deputy on the scene that I don't ever remember. I don't know. He was checking by from somewhere else. And just a matter of several months ago, in the process of Jerry Langton writing this book, I was going through these documents, and this answer to that question has been pending for all these years. there was a deputy who made that scene, and he and in back of his patrol car was Michael Schaefer, the informant. And then when Susan White went up there and was hollering, my son could have done this. He was, he's a good boy. No way he would have done this. This is an effing setup. She was highly intoxicated, highly inebriated at this time, screaming, hollering. And the deputy in the patrol car said, "Hey, this is my patrol scene. This isn't my arrest scene. You need to talk to Deputy McGowen. He's the one in charge here." We didn't know this till 34 years. We found this out just a number of months ago. We stumbled across that report. And so that's who she started calling everybody McGowan.
So that's the only name that she has. And so she assumes that McGowan is the one that's in charge.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And so she went to, and this, mind you, this is 48 hours before the shooting. She could not have identified me. I mean, none of these deputies looked like me at all. And she came over to Scott Genovese, who was standing next to me. I was kneeling down behind a patrol car, and Jason Aguilar, the suspect's son, was in the back of his car. I was writing down the information, waiting on the case number, and writing the information to tow his car, which of course had bullet holes in it from drive-bys, stolen credit cards, stolen debit cards. Well, she comes over and starts hollering at Scott Genovese, who was about 4 inches taller than me. He said, "This is McGowan. I'm not McGowan." So I stood up and I said, "Hey, you didn't get your ass out of here. You're going to jail for interfering. Why didn't you talk to my man? Why didn't you talk to my son? Y'all are effing setting him up." I say, "Look, he'll be in jail for about 4 hours. He can call you when he gets there and gets booked down. He can call you." And so the guy that was with her grabbed her, dragged her off, and put her in his Lincoln Town car. Maybe 5 minutes later, she gets out with one of the first cell phones out in her car, big break one of the black rubber antenna. She's on that phone screaming, hollering, storming back over to me. And she said, "I got Captain Harper," which was CJ Harper. "I got Captain Harper on the phone. He wants to talk to you." And I said, "Hey, look, he's not my chain. I know he is, but he's not my chain of command. He has my be free call me tomorrow." This is 1:30 in the morning. And she had the suspect had this captain's phone number and felt cool calling him at 1:30 in the morning. Was his wife at home. And then she was hollering at me. I was refusing to get on the phone. I said, I'm in the middle of a scene, And so she goes, gets back in the car with that guy, and she was on the passenger side. I'll never forget this. They were backing up because he was trying to get her away from us because he knew, the involvement people he was with. He didn't want to get involved in law enforcement. So anyway, her boyfriend was driving off. She leaned out the window and pointed right at me and said, "I'm going to get you, you son of a bitch." And she did. She destroyed my entire family, my life, our futures, everything over this.
Is that a good picture of her? Did she still look like that?
Negative. That I saw that when you posted that earlier.
That seems to be the picture that's floating around, which for those that are listening is like a young girl who looks like she's in her 20s in a nurse's outfit, very put together.
All right.
And that's what is on almost every podcast thumbnail and every documentary about you. And that's the image that we have when we think of Susan White. Can you describe kind of your observations of Susan White?
Not the same person at all. And when that picture was taken many years prior to this, I was 27 at the time of the shooting, and she was 43. Her husband was, I think, 54. But when she was only a nurse for 2 weeks, and despite, I know the reports out there, obituaries, whatever, that she was a naval officer, which is not true. She was enlisted. She made it through basic training, and on the way to be a dental hygienist, I believe it was, she got caught getting on a Navy aircraft, going to wherever they're going to teach her that, and she had a bunch of quaaludes. She was immediately kicked out of the Navy, and somehow she wound up getting into like an LVN school. That's what that was, and actually she wasn't LVN, but it was only for 2 weeks where she got caught illegally writing her own scripts on a DEA pad. She's writing her own prescriptions for drugs. And she got,
I want to bring that up, not to just beat her down, but I think that it's good to have an accurate portrayal of who we're really dealing with. This is not the nurse that just got out of nursing school and is volunteering at clinics and helping puppies find their way home or anything.
No.
Right.
She had an extensive history. We did a background investigation on her. My attorneys and investigators did, and none of it was allowed in either trial. But the suspect had been in and out of mental institutions her entire life, voluntarily, involuntarily. She had escaped. on one escape in particular. She escaped from a mental hospital. She got in a cab, and of course the police caught her just a few blocks down, and they get her out. Of course, this was her go-to. When I read this, I was like, yeah. She was screaming. She escaped the mental hospital because a female doctor had raped her, and they started accusing the cab driver who happened to pick her up that he had raped her in the cab. That was her go-to, which led many years when I ran into her. Those that throwing that was her go-to. I'm being harassed, sexually harassed. I've been sexually assaulted. That was her go-to if she didn't get things right. But we came across many years into this a psychiatric report on the suspect, where she had confessed to her psychiatrist she'd been addicted to marijuana, methamphetamines, cocaine, LSD, heroin, and just about everything, and an alcoholic. She was diagnosed as a narcissistic sociopath. She did not learn from could not learn from lessons from experiences. She's confrontational, in particular law enforcement, her entire life. In fact, she was many years before this. She was married to a police chief in some little town in Louisiana, and she had attempted to murder him with his own shotgun. She didn't like him, I guess, but she pulled a gun on him. That's when she wound up fleeing to Houston when her son Jason Aguilar, when he was young. But yeah, she had an extensive history of this, and even when she was living in the neighborhood the shooting occurred, she lived in that neighborhood and one right next to it for 10 years and had terrorized the neighborhood. Absolutely terrorized the neighborhood. Neighbors came forward with very bizarre tales. She imposed herself onto the neighborhood with the shooting where she lived and the shooting occurred was Old Oaks. And she had imposed herself in the Old Oaks Ladies Homeowners Association. And they were so terrified of her that they started making videos of her because they knew something was going to happen, with this woman. So they videoed all this stuff. And in the video, just to jump a bit ahead, everything she did in that video was right-handed. Eating, drinking, smoking, bowling, playing golf, everything was right-handed. What that plays into the story later on. But yeah, she had an extensive history of this. In and out of mental institutions. At the time of the shooting, she was high on drugs. She had 4 different drugs in her system, which the doctor said that would have definitely impaired her ability to think right and
Yeah, and
react
let's
right
get
in
to that.
circumstance. Yeah.
But I want to get to, let's talk about, or go ahead and talk about why she had an arrest warrant to begin with.
Yeah. After the arrest occurred at 1:30 in the morning of the son, and that was like Saturday night into Sunday morning. And then about 4:00 that Sunday afternoon, or night shift, of course I was asleep, about 4:00 Sunday afternoon, my beepers went off with 911. 911, it was the informant. So I called, and we had codes, like if you're my informant, call me and put number, like number 599 or whatever it was, so I know who it was. He put his little code in there. I called him. He was in a panic, and he said, "Hey, they know I was the informant, and Jason's mom, which was Susan White, the informant. Susan White was a suspect." And he said that she had called his family, saying, basically, I know Michael's the informant. Don't you watch TV? Informants in Houston don't live long. Informants get killed. Blah blah blah, to that effect. And so, of course, he was in a panic, Michael Schaefer. So I said, "Where are you?" And he said, "Well, I'm at my brother's house here in Houston." I said, "Are you safe there?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Stay there. I'll come into work early I'll come into work early that night." And so I got to work a bit early, like 9:00, and then he called him. I said, "What the hell's going on, man?" He said, "Man, Susan White, they know I'm the informant." He told me that after we let him go the night before, because you always take the informant down. We'd worked a plan to, secrete him, separate him from the other suspects, and get him out of there. Well, he said that he went back in the Blockbuster video stores, and a guy pulled up, pointed a gun at him. "Hey, snitch this, snitch that." And so he was in quite the panic when I called him. So he told me the story that Susan White, the suspect, had called Michael Schaefer, the informant, called his aunt in Killeen. Her name was Sherry Maltsby. And then Sherry Maltsby called her mother in Austin. Jeannie Jakes, which was the informant's mom, and she called him. Anyway, that's how the threats got back. So I hung up the phone with him. I called the district attorney's office, spoke to Jean Spradling Hughes. She was the assistant DA working intake that night. And she said, yeah, she would take charges for felony retaliation. She said, but you need to call and talk to the informant's mother, actually talked to Susan White and got the threats. So I did that. Made got in touch with the mom in Austin. She called, confirmed the threats. She was, that, and I asked her, because I know I've done this before, So I asked her. I said, she told me she knew Susan White. She never met her. She talked to her on the phone, and she said she was, man, the woman sounded crazy every time I talked to her. And so, well, and she said that. I said, do you think that Susan White has the ability to do something, dangerous to your son, cause him any bodily harm, or can have it done? She said, absolutely. And I said, well, I'm gonna get a arrest warrant, have her picked up. She said, I'm greatly relieved, And so that's what I did. I did the report, got down to the district attorney's office that night. It was maybe 2:00 in the morning, time everything done. I went there, and Jean Spradling Hughes, the DA working intake, she got off at midnight. So her relief was Jim Mount. He's the one you see in these documentaries. They're blaming each other, blaming me for the mess up. But we met with Jim Mount. He read the report, got all the details on what was going on. And, he read the entire report, what was in it about the Uzi. There was no Uzi purchased at all. And it clearly stated on the front of the report, it was a Smith & Wesson, blue steel Smith & Wesson 357 Magnum 119, which had Bugs Bunny stickers stuck on it for whatever reason, if they stole it. But they, went down and talked to Jim Mount. We finished up, it was like 4:30 in the morning. And I said, and what they do is have judges on call 24/7. And he wouldn't wake up the judge. I said, well, that's what the judge is for, Hey, so just, another judge comes in about 6 in the morning. He said, just hang out. And I said, well, let's leave it here if my day shift guy comes on at 6. See, that's point one, where if I left it there, after the day shift deputy, Tommy Moore, who attempted to serve the warrant, he went that morning and got it, or tried to get it. And if he would have gotten and served it, none of this would happen. But it was to no fault of his. The DA's office screwed up the warrant. So,
right. And I want to interject something, because you're a really bad murderer if your plan is to, unless you were in cahoots with the deputy from day shift, to give the warrant to him to serve it, right? Like the sole narrative that you had this mastermind plan to murder her, and you were going to do that by serving this warrant, doesn't work out well if you're trying to not pawn, but get the guy from day shift to serve it, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. They, Tommy Moore, he went to get he did. He showed up down there. He went on, he just come a little bit early. He probably got down there like 6:15 in the morning. And he went and got the warrant. I'd never put hands on the warrant at that point. Tommy Moore went and got the warrant and took it to the judge. And the judge looked at it, and it was literally where I had signed 3 times as the financial warrant. It had been whited out, which they actually used to do that in the day. And then so the judge said, I'm not going to sign this. So about 10 o'clock that morning, which would have been Monday morning, I get a call on my beeper. I called the DA's office, and it was Deputy Tommy Moore. And he said, hey, I got your warrant, but they're not gonna let me use it. You have to come back down to your name and wind it out. And then at that point, the assistant DA who was signing the case, she got on the phone and started hollering, ripping me up one side down the other. Why didn't you get this done last night? Why you should have served this last night? I said, hey, I tried to. Your coworker, Jim Mount, wouldn't let it happen, And so I said, just leave it there. I'll come into work early that night and get it. So I went in that night to get the warrant, and it went there early. Went down and met with Mike Anderson, good DA. He wound up being a judge, then the district attorney, as did his wife. And I go down there as a young HPD. I was 27. There was a younger HPD officer there, and we got both our warrants signed. Mike Anderson. We took him to Judge Don Shipley's house. We got there maybe 11:45. And I remember talking, he was an older judge at the time, and he was telling us about his wife, recently passed away. We talked about that. He showed us his gun collection. And And, we were in no big rush, like they said, go up there and, stomp this woman or whatnot. And so the HPD officer went his way. I went mine. On the way back to the station, I bumped the Sergeant Ruggiero. And I told him, I said, I have the warrant. He said, well, bring it to the office. All right. So I get to the office and I walk in. He yanks it out of my hand. And Deputy Mike Malloy and Todd Moran, the guys who were running the warrant with me, have backed me absolutely to this day. They've much, as I'm sure it's called those guys a lot of grief, but they have never backed off or wavered in their stories of what happened. And a point is he made that we weren't like, we weren't buddies, and we never saw each other off duty. We ate it, we'd go eat breakfast 4:35 in the morning, back each other up on calls here and there. That was about it. We really didn't know each other. And I'd only been on the district a few months also. But I went into the office, Ruggiero yanked the warrant out of my hand. And I said, I despise that dude. Everybody did. And no business being a police officer, let alone a supervisor. But he yanks out of my hand, he looks at it, and he goes, take him wrong, Roy, go run the fucking warrant. And I said, hey, man, you need to go. I said, this is involving burglary ring, there's automatic weapons, drugs. I mean, there's a lot more in the background of this stuff. And then he looked at me and goes, this is a direct quote. And I think it's the first sentence in the book. And Sergeant looked at me, he goes, what are you, some kind of fucking pussy? Take him wrong, Roy, and run the fucking warrant. I said, hey, man, because that's the other point. I would not want to get that sergeant out there with me if I was doing anything wrong, or even though it wasn't anything wrong, I don't want anything to do with that guy. Why would I try to get that idiot to go with us, right? And so he refused to go. And so I said, well, you need to assign some more deputies to run this. This is a felony warrant. Because as you know, I worked for Houston PD for to the county. We always had, at least probably a sergeant and 6 or 8 of us running any manner of felony warrant. So I told him, I said, hey, you need to get more deputies, which I was requesting to get more deputies I didn't even know, because they would have had to come from a different part of the district,
Let me interject something real quick. So I want to give some people some background. First of all, that quote you were talking about don't be a pussy, is in page 1 of Reasonable Doubts by Jerry Langton. So make sure you pick that up. Very interesting read. But you've alluded to this before. This is not your first department. Mm-hmm. And you had worked in the Houston Police Department, correct?
Right.
That was a much more professional department. So you're kind of used to a higher standard when it comes to, okay, we've got this known threat. We've got a arrest warrant that's signed by a judge, and we know that in that house, it's someone with gun charges. So you don't want to go into that with, haphazardly, right?
Right.
So was your mindset just different than the guys around you, especially your supervisor, or do you think this was just a culture aspect of the sheriff's department during that time?
Yeah, back then the sheriff's department it's all different ballgame now, both the sheriff and the DA. But back then, man, they were just understaffed, ridiculously understaffed. And there was no SWAT teams. There was no hostage negotiating. We did everything. Patrolman. There was no hostage negotiation.
Cowboy up, kick the door in, and
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Absolutely. And there was none of that. And like I said, I'd only been out there 4 or 5 months before the shooting, so I don't really know hardly knew those guys. I didn't socialize with any guys I worked with. So I hired on as an instructor. I was an instructor before I went on our patrol. But they, and I told them, man, you need to get 5, 6, 7 more guys to go with us out here. This is insane. And once again, what are you, a fucking pussy? Take me around the lawyer and run the fucking warrant. I said, man. And so before I left the substation with Morong and Malloy, I stopped. And see, that's another point. I was going to get more deputies go to commit this big murder plot, right? And I've served a number of warrants before this, and I've never done this before, man. But I actually called the suspect. I was going to call her and tell her she could turn herself in. I don't know if they still do. They used to have what was called a no arrest bond. You could get a lawyer or go to a bond fund and post your, if you knew what your bond was, post your bond and keep you trying to spend a day or 2 in jail. So I figured, living in this, I didn't know this woman. I didn't know none of Morong and Malloy and I, none of us knew this stuff about this woman, even though many other deputies did. We're never warned. We're never warned by our supervisors. Hey, be careful. There's guns in that house or drugs. That woman is her history, her history among the districts out there, and some her conduct, unprofessional conduct to say the very least, with some command staff personnel that have personal relationships with her, which was admitted to. But yeah, I tried to call, and we had the tape recorder of that. Back then, they had the answering machines at your house, the homes. And I called, and she didn't answer the phone. Hung up, called again, and both of those on the cassette tape. And she wouldn't answer the phone, so we stepped out, and I'm wrong and Lord, like, what the hell's going on? I briefed them on the situation, right? And I said, well, let's go. These are some good guys. They've been out there a long time. They know what they were doing.
Well, before you get to that, I want to
Mhm.
make another point about this. Again, you're doing a very poor job of executing a murder if you're calling the person beforehand and
Right.
trying to get themselves to turn themselves in. Another thing that you're doing a poor job of is you're inviting witnesses to the
Right.
scene in a form of backup, right? Like if
Correct.
there's this whole conspiracy that you're trying to take her out, I would guess that it's not a good idea to call her beforehand and try to get her to turn herself in without receiving a bond. And it's also a bad idea to bring guys that you really don't even know that well.
Hmm.
Like they're not, I've seen interviews. They're like, yeah, we knew who you were, but they weren't your buddies or anything, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've never, yeah, we didn't, I don't think I ever saw each other off duty. But, like I said, try to make the calls to going out there, try to get the supervisor, to assign more deputies to run with us. Of course, he refused. He maintained security, if you will. He stayed in the air conditioning, the safety and comfort of his office during this whole time. We have to try to make the calls. Ron Malloy, now we step out. I'll brief them what's going on. They said, well, let's roll, man. And so we went to, we got over to we parked about a house or two down from the residence where the warrant was going to be served. And this is because I think it was Breonna Taylor who started all the no knock warrant situation going on. This is exactly why you don't knock on the door. This would never happen if I'd have done like I served countless other warrants. But being in a fluid neighborhood, not knowing the mental drug alcohol situation with the mother, Deputy Morong and I went to the front door, and Malloy went around the back of the house to maintain security. So we get a 360 around the house, and Morong and I started knocking on the door, and then we knocked for a couple of minutes, and then it was dark in the house, and then Susan White came. The suspect came to the door, and she was clearly intoxicated on something, which was after the autopsy. She had 4 different drugs in her system. She was slurred voice. She was hollering, "Who is it?" And Morong saying it's the sheriff's department. And she went, "What do you want here?" And then she had called the sheriff's department 34 nights in a row prior to this. I'm doing, go ahead.
And just to be clear, you are wearing your regular sheriff's department
Right.
uniform, and you're
Yes.
driving marked police
Correct.
cars.
Yeah,
Or
we're
sheriff's
all in
department
uniform.
cars.
Right, we're all in uniform at this point. We're in our patrol cars, yeah. Marked
So
cars.
there's not a question about who you are unless you've got 3 guys who dressed up as sheriff's deputies and stole cruisers, right?
Right, right.
Okay.
Yeah, and she was hollering that she was saying, "I want to see your IDs." And Morong, you were trying to get her to open the door, and snatch her out. And Morong he was saying, "We can't stick them under the door. You have to open the door." She wouldn't open the door, and she starts hollering. And then then Morong says, "This is Deputy McGowen and Deputy Morong at the sheriff's office. You need to come out." Well, somewhere at this point, about that time, she calls the sheriff's department, their emergency number. And she starts on the sheriff's dispatchers, and she's saying, "I want to talk to Lieutenant Coons. There's police. She said police or deputies wanted, and they won't show me their IDs. One of them thinks runs the world." And then she said, "I need to talk to Lieutenant Coons and dispatch." Of course, we have those recordings. And the dispatcher said, "Lieutenant Coons on work area works at Cypress Wood. You need to call there." Then the suspect hung up. I don't know where she called from there. Then she called back a second time. even more irate. And so I knew at this point, and then 911 got on after the second call. So I knew the sheriff's department and the 911 operators were recording the calls. So that's another thing I had to figure in on a murder scheme is how I was going to get around all this being recorded, of course.
Right.
And so I'm talking to dispatchers, I'm talking to 911 on the radio, and they're telling her, you need to open the door, you need to open the door. That's so she starts hollering my name. And Morong and I look at each other like, where the hell she get my name from, But she, anyway, at this point, we're out there for a little more than 15 minutes. And so I told Morong, I said, hey, I'm going to back off. I'm going to call Ruggiero in the safety and comfort of his office. Because we did not have to have supervisor's permission to kick a door. We had a valid felony warrant.
Right.
But I didn't trust that sergeant at all. So I backed up. I went on the sidewalk, on the side of the house to the driveway, and I bumped Sergeant Ruggiero. I told him to take the tack channel. It's a back channel. It's like a car to car. And I said, hey, man, we're out here running this warrant, and she's refusing to open the door. He said, I'm monitoring the radio. And I said, what do you want us to do? He goes, it's a fucking felon warrant in it. He said, kick the fucking door. I said, man, all right. So I went back and told Morong. I said, hey, Ruggiero said to force the door. So I was a pretty good sized guy. Morong was quite a bit larger than me. And these are this was like a double door, very expensive looking, had the cut glass in it. And then Morong, he's back and he kicks the door once, and it was a no-go. And then he kicked the second time, it wasn't budging. At that point, I told Morong, I said, hey, why don't you just wait here? No sense in busting out these expensive doors. And I'll go around with Malloy, make 4th entry to the rear. And point of this, Morong was kicking that door. If that door would have come down, Morong would have been the first one in there, and he most probably would have shot her. As Morong had said, he goes, I'd have shot her. Right, I wouldn't have waited 3 times like McGowan did in his statement. He said, I shot her when I started pointing a gun at me. So when Morong maintained security at the front, I'm around the back with Mike Malloy, the other deputy. And we even knocked on the door again at the back, seeing he needed to come through there. Well, when Malloy and I were knocking on the back door, Morong sees the suspect coming through the house, towards us. You can just kind of see her shadow going through the cut glass, whatever, going toward us at the back door. So he comes around back, and as he's moving around the back of the house, I told Malloy, I said, kick it. Malloy kicked the door. It was a much lighter door, of course, which went to utility room. I told Malloy, I said, hey, kick the door, man. And he hit it once, and then didn't do anything. Hit a second time, the door cracked, heard the alarm go off. And yeah, even to this day, man, hearing an alarm go off, it's like as they say, trigger word, trigger for me. But anyway, the second time the alarm went off. Third time he turned around, mule kicked it, and the door went in, and then Malloy turned and make entry into the house, and it was dark in the house. We had our flashlights, of course. But Malloy, he tripped and fell because the suspect, when her husband had left her that's a whole crazy story. But anyway, she had destroyed the house. And so there's a lot of trash, everything everywhere. Malloy made entry into the house, and he tripped and fell. And just being tactically sound and just working on officer safety, of course, when he fell, I went over Malloy to protect him. We're in a felony warrant, 1:30 in the morning, dark house. So I went over to protect Malloy. So if Malloy would have tripped, Malloy would probably wound up shooting the suspect, But he tripped and fell, so I covered him, and we went to a small utility room out at the washer and dryer, whatever, garbage and trash stacked up. But directly in front of me was a small, like a breakfast nook, then the kitchen, then the formal dining room. I made a quick sweep of that and had my weapon in my right hand, my string light, an SL-35 in my left hand. And as soon as I swung right, there was a very large living room, and there was a doorway on the far side of the living room. And it was the doorway was to the bedroom. And I see the suspect.
Sorry to interrupt you here.
No.
I just want to give just some clear perspective. So when you're entering through the back of the house, like you said, you kind of enter into a laundry room.
Right.
The house is dark. There's trash everywhere. The deputy that was in the front has already tripped once, and you quickly clear that. You shine your flashlight, and you're looking towards the front of the house now, which is her bedroom is in the front of the house, correct?
Correct. We're looking straight north. The house faced north, and the northwest corner was the the formal dining area. Her bedroom is to my right, diagonally in the northeast corner of the house.
Okay. And that's when you see her run towards the bedroom, right?
Well, I see her crossing the door. The door of the bedroom was open. I see her cross, not going into it, but crossing from right to left.
Okay, got
Yeah,
you.
yeah. At this point, I see something in her hand. I think it's the phone, the old mobile phones they used to have. Because I knew she was running around talking to 911, the sheriff, and also was being recorded. And I see her crossing from right to left with something in her right hand. And there's been a big, ridiculous. Even Jim Mount, the DA, said it was ridiculous. Why don't we go, clear the rest of the house first? Well, when you're running a felony warrant, on somebody, you see the suspect, that's why you're there. You're not going to go search the rest of the house and let the suspect grab a weapon, if you will,
Right.
flush drugs or whatnot.
And you don't have a bunker. This is not, you've just got a revolver, a flashlight. Do you even have vest back then?
Yeah, we're just a big, heavy, just regular, what's that, point blank vest. You wore under our uniform shirts. Nothing like it is now. No.
Okay. But you're out in the open and there's no element of surprise here.
Correct.
They know you're in the house. And so you're absolutely right. I would do the same thing. You go towards the threat and start getting aggressive.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous. There's been a big issue about that. Why didn't you clear the rest of the house? Well, that's why you're there for that suspect. Of course, you're going to be on a suspect. So at this point, I don't know Moron's. It's me, and the stick is I'm number one because Malloy had fallen. So I'm number one going in, and then Malloy's number two behind me. And I don't know Moron's behind Malloy. So we beeline diagonally across the large living room for the bedroom door. And this time the alarm's going off. We're hollering sheriff's office, felony warrant, come over and see your hands. And then I go over to the door, and I had a Glock at the time. I had a Glock in my right hand, and I had my SL-35 flash at my left hand. I leaned the door to the bedroom, swung from my right to my left, and it was open. It was up. There was like a nightstand and a small TV, and had the old cable converter box on top of that. And the door was, swung up, and it was blocked from opening all the way by that. I lean around there, and I see the suspect standing there, and she had her right elbow against her right side. I see the weapon she had. It was a nickel-plated, chrome-plated Lorson semi-automatic handgun. I see the weapon in her hand, and I'm pointing at her, and I said, and it's pointed at me at this point, But I said, drop the gun, drop the gun. I didn't have a duty to retreat. I wouldn't have retreated. But if I couldn't retreat, I had, 250 pounds of, big old Texas deputies right behind me, literally, right next to me. And I told her, I said, drop the gun, drop the gun. And then the third time, I told her twice, and after I say twice, drop the gun. She pulls the gun up, and she points it right in my face. I mean, she pulls it up eye level, pointing right in my face. And it was just bizarre, that situation, because I've run warrants and done other things, but being in this nice house and there's this female, it struck me as I don't know. I knew it was a danger, but it caught me off guard, if you will. So I didn't expect that response at all, And then we're at that point where the proverbial Mexican standoff. Sorry, and then I told her the third time. I said, because I see her, she had the weapon was indexed. Her finger wasn't on the trigger. And you've been a policeman for 20-something years. You do tunnel vision. And I see it like a Polaroid picture in my head right now. Everything slows down. You don't really hear anything. You see tunnel vision. And the only way somebody's going to kill you is with their hands, right? So that's what I was watching. And I see her put it, and I said, drop the gun, I'm going to shoot. So my exact word, I said, drop the gun, I'm going to shoot. And she put her finger on the trigger, and I saw her tensing up, So, I want to get shot, At that split second, it shot through. I'll never forget this, man. I remember like it happened 5 minutes ago. It shot through my head that she's going to take me out and then take out Morong and Malloy, And I wasn't going to let that happen. We all had kids and wives and whatnot. And I fired first. I did what I had to do. I just, I didn't know she was drugged up at the time, but it was an armed suspect pointing a gun at my face and starting to pull the trigger. After giving her every opportunity, the suspect escalated this every opportunity. Every opportunity she kept escalating. She could have stopped it at any point. But so at that split second, I fired. I did what I was trained to do, fired 3-round burst. And bullet, because her hand was pointing at me. Bullet one took the right cuff of the garment she was wearing and struck center mass. Bullet two was right behind one, and she's kind of. I remember it like a Polaroid. My slide back, two spent casings in there, and a muzzle blast, and a blur of the suspect. I remember that. It just happened.
Just take a moment.
But and I said, and then the second bullet two is firing bullet one, and by that time she had turned somewhat, and it struck in the right arm, went through the right arm and into the right chest cavity. It was a non-lethal. It was a non-lethal round, that one. And then as I was backing up, round three went through the cable converter box, the corner of it, and it deformed. And the suspect literally fell into the path of the bullet. She was going down because that one had ricocheted. That's one thing everybody on both sides have agreed with. It was a deformed bullet that struck in the face shot. And it just hit her in the right side of the nose and then skidded across her left cheek. And then she was down. And at this point, we're hollering, the radio's blaring, the alarm's going off. Your ears are ringing. Firing a 10 millimeter 3 times in a bedroom. Your night vision's gone. And that's the first time I remember seeing Todd Morong, who was there. And Todd ducked under me and ran, jumped. The suspect landed on top of a waterbed. He jumped on top of her. And there was a lightning trial. They're saying that, and I did say this, you heard me tell her 3 times drop the gun. When the trial, the DAs are like I was nudging Mike Malloy, hey man, you got me, dude. You got me right. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Like that at all, man. That's not how it happened at all. I was,
Yeah, and I want to be clear with something.
mhm,
I'll say this again, that you and Mike were not close, and I think that's kind of
yeah,
the narrative
yeah,
that, oh, that you and him had this conspiracy or something,
yeah.
when that's not the truth.
Not at all.
And the other thing, before I ask you some more questions, I just want to point out, the Big Rooster just point out that you've kept to the story consistently throughout the years.
Never wavered. Never.
Uh, So I do have some questions. You
Hmm.
said that you served, let's say, hundreds of warrants, right? Like, this is kind of a common practice. And the majority of the time, you're not shooting people, right?
Correct. The vast majority of the time, man.
How many people have you shot before that?
This one, none. I've
So
been,
you've
I
not shot anyone before, right?
no, I've been in multiple. I've been in situations where other officers were shot. I've been in
Right.
situations where I've been totally justified. But I was asked that very question by the grand jury. You know, and this at this time, it was just. I mean, it was. What was I going to do? What would you have done? What would
Would it be,
anybody have done?
and this is why I'm going with this, because
Mhm.
I've been in calls where, it seems routine, even though
Mhm.
searching a house or going after a suspect is very chaotic, and it looks extremely chaotic for uh, a juror or someone that's not into law enforcement. But
Mhm.
when you've been doing this a lot, if you have ran in there and thrown cuffs on her, thrown her on the bed, and taken her to jail and used some minor uses of force, this would have just been one of those hundreds of times that you served a warrant, right?
Right. If we just kicked in the door and not gave her the opportunity, to come out peacefully, if we'd have done like I've never not done a dynamic entry. That was the only time. Look what happened. That's why That's why that that no knock is. That's why you don't knock on a door. This is what happened. They flee. They grab a gun. They dispose of evidence.
Yeah,
You
and
know.
there's a lot to unpack with that, because you've
Mhm.
also got the fact that you're not just going into her house, you're going into the house of a person that has gun charges,
Mhm.
uh, and there's weapons in the house. So I think a lot of departments now would have been doing like they call it like a breach and hold, where you boot the
Right.
door down. They've got a barricade and you're calling the person out, and you're treating it like a barricade subject.
No.
Um, and it's because of reasons like that, is because there's this trend of suicide by cop, which is what
That's
this feels like to me.
I mean, man, I've argued that since day one. I argue that with my attorneys because the phenomenon, or what do you call it, of suicide by cop, it was
Right.
barely even discussed, back then. And the 48 hours between the arrest of her son, she was suicidal and homicidal, but she had changed her will. Well, she'd written a will in that 48 hours, and she told her one and only friend that who was so nutty they never even called her to testify the grand jury anywhere. But she made a statement that Susan White said she was going to kill herself during that 48 hours. Another point to that is the weapon that was recovered. It had a round in the chamber. I mean, in the magazine, there was no round in the Chamber. That's not saying she wasn't trying to rack it in. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, I thought about that countless times. Was she going to get in a gun battle, with three highly trained, heavily armed, Harris County deputy sheriffs? And what was her point in pulling the gun? I've tried to get more. I've tried to tell my lawyers, you need to argue this suicide by cop, man. She was suicidal. She was a complete mental case. Psychiatric records confirmed. A drug addict, alcoholic. And contrary to other lies, her family had not talked to her in more than a year. They just totally said, we've had it with her before the shooting, And what other, it was suicide by cop. I've always said that. I don't use the word cop. That's a derogatory term down here. But it was suicide by cop, man. That's what I've said. Dude, I don't care how drugged up she was. She couldn't think she's going to win a gun battle with this, that she wasn't going to go to jail. I think she grabbed a gun, not out of fear. She grabbed a gun because she never said a word to me, and, don't shoot, I'm dropping the gun. And she aggressive and she points, she pulls it out, goes, moves further and points it right at me. I throw her a third time, which I can't even, in hindsight, I should have, I would never let somebody point a gun at me for that length of time. He said, drop the gun, and then she sticks in my face, puts her finger on the trigger, drop the gun, I'm going to shoot you. And then she starts to pull the trigger,
Yeah, and it's unfortunate when these things happen because it's not that you are losing the person that is essentially committing suicide, but you're also putting that toll and burden on the deputy or police officer that has to take a life. And that's something that they have to deal with for the rest of their life,
Right.
even if they're justified, which is, again, it's become like this phenomenon. And unfortunately, it's become popular in today's society.
Yes.
So after this happened, I know that you said you experienced some auditory exclusion, right? Where you're having trouble hearing. There's also the alarm is going after that.
Mhm.
Did you remember how many rounds you fired?
I did, but we were trained. Back when people carried revolvers, back when you started, I imagine, they trained law enforcement to fire 2-round bursts because you had a 6-shot revolver. So you knew you did 3 2-round bursts, you need to reload. But when they started carrying the high capacity, the semi-automatics, we started going to 3-round burst. And I fired 3 rounds as hard and fast as I could.
Okay.
And I remember, bam, 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 shots went off. I didn't look at, like I'm like, hey, you heard me, dude. You got me right. Hell no. My emotion was at that split second was I was pissed. I
Do
was
you
very
remember
angry.
looking at your sights at all, or were you just
No,
pointing and pressing?
man, it was muscle memory. It was just I
So you're like
recall. I
punching
mean, I
out
don't
and
recall
just
looking at the sights at all.
yes.
Actually, when the shots were fired, that's a good question. Bam, 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 the shots were fired. I looked at Malloy and I was just pissed, and I was like, "You fucking heard me! I told her." I was like, God, "I told her, man, drop the gun." I'm trying to, I wasn't like, "Hey, you heard me, right?" I was just pissed. I was like, "I told you, you heard me, right?" Yeah, well, that took about maybe 1 or 2 seconds, and Morong went under. And I have no idea what to do because I created a big the screen, my big SL35, the big one. I have no idea what to do with that flashlight at that point. I remember I had my handcuffs out by the time I stepped forward. And then Morong was holding her down because she found a waterbed, so there was a bit of movement. So we didn't know she'd been struck at this point, right? And so Ron's on top of her. I had my handcuffs out. And in 34 years, it's not a conflict. The only thing Morong and I have disagreed on, we haven't disagreed with both. I guess you've been on top of situations. It's just freaking chaos, you know?
Right.
And then I always satisfied because I distinctly remember Morong. I said, "Where's the gun?" And remember Morong said, "There it is." And it was underneath. The suspect fell basically on her left side, but face down. And the gun was under her right hand. Her right knee was moved over her left knee. And the weapon was under her right hand, which was under her right knee. And then Morong said that I always said, "There's the gun." I remember, and I just think, there's the gun. So I reached under and with my left pinky because I saw my weapon on her. I didn't know, the gun was still pointing at me at that point. I grabbed onto the trigger of my pinky and pitched the gun over her weapon over on the floor. And then Todd rolled over and looked at her. I think she's dead. And then so I backed up and I immediately got on the radio. And I was using a 4176. I remember exactly what I said. I said 4176, shots fired, suspects down, all deputies okay, roll supervisor, EMS in the package. Package being internal affairs, homicide. And down here we call it CSU, crime scene unit, and that's the package. And so at that point, I backed up to the doorway where the shots were fired, and Mariah and Roy went to search the rest of the house, and they found her son, Jason Aguilar, who was supposed to have been no bonded. We couldn't figure out why he was there, but he was also up there on the phone with 911, high on weed. And I remember standing by the door, and I knew everybody'd be there within minutes, and I was standing at the bedroom door, and Roy and Morong, they'd handcuffed Jason Aguilar because, he'd been involved in gangs and weapons and whatnot. And I remember them bringing him down the stairs. And if I recall, he's wearing boxers. And I remember that little dude looking at me and smirking. Like, he didn't care, And and then this other side story was that when that poor little angel of a boy came down, he looked at me and I was smirking and laughing, about being forced to shoot his mother. But that dude, Jason Aguilar, we'll get to his history, what he was, But anyway, they bring him out, put Mike Malloy and Todd Morong, bring Jason Aguilar out, put him in their patrol car. I could hear the sirens, the ambulance, everybody coming. And then Sergeant Ruggiero, he's about the third or fourth unit there because the station wasn't 5 or 6 minutes from there. And he comes out, trying to, raise hell, control everything. He came up to me and told me to go sit in his patrol car. And I said, all right, So I was sitting in the patrol car. I went to get in it, and he hands me a legal pad and a pen. He said, "Hey, you need to start writing down everything that just happened." I'm like, what? That is not exactly, how situations are handled.
I just want to interject here. In modern policing, that would be the exact opposite. They actually give you time to decompress.
Right.
Right. And the reason for it is you've just been in one of the most stressful situations of your life, and your body mechanics aren't even working properly. Like you're saying, you get tunnel vision, you get the auditory exclusion, people's sometimes their hands and I guess their tactile feel goes away during high stress. There's a lot of, your blood pressure's up, a lot of bad things are happening. So that's not the best time to get an accurate description of what just happened. You need to give that officer some time, or deputy some time to cool down and to, get back to a normal baseline.
Yeah, when he handed me that legal pad, the hero Ruggiero, I just stood up on his dashboard. I don't write anything down because I knew my attorney, because all police officers have their unions or associations have attorneys on call, of course. So I knew that Clint Greenwood was en route, my union attorney. He lived maybe 30 minutes from there. But so I sat in a patrol car, and then on the other side, the other tabloid trash stories or whatever, we were, grab assing and laughing, none of that happened. I was sitting there, and I remember a female deputy came up and knocked on the window, I opened the door. I'd never seen her before. She was like working a special unit out there for whatever reason. They call it hotspot unit. But I remember she told me, she said, "Hey, man," she goes, "You want something to drink?" And I said, "Yeah." So she ran down to the convenience store and got a bunch of, Cokes for us. And he comes back. She hands mine to me, and she said, she goes, she handed me her card with her number on it. And she said, I was in a shooting 2 weeks ago. And she said, if you need to talk, just give me a holler, So, and then I sat there in the car until Clint got there, my attorney, and he was also a police officer and former prosecutor. But Clint got in the patrol car with me, and he's like, "Hey, what happened?" I told him just a quick brief rundown. He's all right. He said, "We're gonna do a walkthrough, which you walk through with your lawyer, internal affairs, homicide, the DA investigators who showed up, and the assistant DAs and their investigators showed up. But we get out, we do the walkthrough, and then I remember I was going to walk through exactly where we walked and where everybody was at the time, and they get up to the door where I leaned in where the shooting was, and they were kind of looking and talking amongst themselves. And my lawyer elbowed me and he said, "Hey, look at that right there." And kind of whispered. And back then they had these like big speakers, like your mom and my mom and dad used to have for their stereos. There was a legal pad on it, and it was handwritten in by the suspect, and it was this long, which we now have a copy of it. This long rambling letter about the sheriffs, and they're brutalizing kids out there, and we're all corrupt and this and that. And she said in particular, deputy, and she literally wrote a line to like put my name in it when she found out who it was. She didn't even know who to put my name in there at that point, and that was clearly written between the arrest of her son and the shooting. And also recovered on the bed where she had fallen was a record slip that I filled out to tow her son's car. Excuse me, 48 hours early in her handwriting, which we have, of course, now. Well, this was withheld from us for all these years. But her handwriting, she'd written on a tow slip, Deputy J.K. McGowen, unit number 4176. I mean, she knew me. Why would she wouldn't need to write that on there, And because she didn't know my first name, she just knew my initial. So no time she ever said was McGowen, anytime she said anything about me. But we did the walkthrough and then went to the station, and Clint was with me, and Chuck Leitner, who's come forward with a great interview about this just in the last year, and told what really happened with him on this. But I gave my statement at that point, and that was like we finished up like 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning. I had Tuesdays and Wednesdays off, and so I had my Tuesday, which I was up, and I slept basically through Tuesday for what little I could sleep, and then I had my Tuesday and Wednesday off. Then I went back to work Thursday, and they never
So
gave me a
you
day
had,
off.
I just want to, this is amazing. So you basically had 2 days off.
Which are my regular scheduled days off anyway. Yeah.
So they gave you your regular scheduled days off.
Yeah.
There's an investigation that started, right?
Right.
Like I assume every officer involved shooting,
Mhm.
there's going to be an investigation, right?
Yeah.
So that's obviously is not concluded. Are people treating you well at this point? Is this
Yeah.
just every day is normal when you come back to work? And how are you feeling then? Are
Yeah,
you
it was. Yeah, actually, they had three investigations going. Well, they had the DA's office, internal affairs, and homicide. You had three different investigations going on, which I was cleared by internal affairs and homicide, by the way. But it was just there was just a handful of us out there. We didn't even have roll call. There weren't even enough of us to have roll call. But after about a week of going back to work, I mean, it was just doing the same thing I'd been doing. And Brong and Roy and we talked a couple of times, and about a week in this, I called Ruggiero on when I worked night shift 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. So about 8 o'clock one night, I said, "Man, I just can't go in. That's all I do it." And my wife said, just call in sick. So I called Ruggiero and said, "Hey, I'll burn my own sick day. You build sick days, so I'm gonna
right?
burn a sick day." And once again, that asshole said, he goes, what are you, some kind of fucking pussy? You need to come in, or everybody's gonna think you're a pussy, man. He hung up the phone. That was my supervisor's response. Yeah.
And I
So,
told actually when I was talking to Jerry when I first started, that was very much the attitude in police departments
mhm,
of you never call in sick.
mhm,
If you're vomiting, if you're crapping your pants, you're dragging yourself to work. And I remember guys that would call out sick, and the older guys would be like, you know what? We're going to his house. He's not really sick. And they
yeah,
would show up at the dude's house. And
yeah,
I mean, but that was kind of the police culture back then, right?
yeah,
But even then, back when I started, they used to refer it as the 2-week vacation when you're into a shooting, where you would have 2 weeks off just to decompress. You
Yeah.
had 2 days.
They didn't even put me like on desk duty. I mean, I was back
Right.
in that same area, which that neighborhood was in my beat, for 2 months before the
Did you
grand
have the
jury.
same gun, or did they take that did
Oh yeah.
crime scene take it?
Well, the CSU guys always take a weapon, just standard procedure to ballistics, right?
Right.
They took my Glock and they gave me an old beat up uh, Beretta 92 9mm.
Yeah.
It had two full metal jacket bullets in it, which we couldn't carry full metal jackets. That's what they gave me to carry, you know. And so I called Lieutenant Coons and I said, because I had a 45 I carried at the city, HPD, Houston. And he said, just wear that, man. Don't worry about it. They gave me an old beat up Beretta with one magazine in it. There's of course no round in the chamber. It had two 9mm full metal jacket bullets in it. That's what they gave me to carry. You know?
Okay, so instead you're wearing your personal firearm, which you haven't
Yeah.
qualified with.
You know what?
I'm
I
assuming.
did. Yeah, I had qualified with the 45,
Oh, you
but
did?
I had my HPD rig.
Okay.
HPD had more modern, Sam Brown belt, your gun belt, than what the county was wearing. And yeah, my lieutenant said, yeah, just wear your Houston gear, which I had qualified at the county in my 45 anyway. I carried it off duty sometimes. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, that makes me feel better at least.
Yeah.
So you're wearing your 45, you're back at work, and at what point did they tell you that they need to pull you from the street because there's a investigation going on?
They never did. I worked all the way till after the grand jury. Matter of fact, it was like 3 or 4 days after the shooting, and I was at a gas station at a major intersection. I was talking to my wife on the phone actually. At the no cell phones then, and a pickup truck drove by and fired some shots. They weren't shooting me; they were shooting whatever. So I hung up and I got on the radio. I said, "I got shots fired. White Ford traveling eastbound, whatever." And I knew they had a gun, so I'm right on top of them. They pulled over, and the guy was reaching under the seat. I had him down with that gun. And guess who my backup was? It was David Rogero, the sergeant. He must have been going to, get something to eat or something because he didn't ever patrol. But it was man. I said, if I don't want to have to shoot those dudes, that would have been the end. It was very close. But I didn't never. And the shooting was 25 October 92. The grand jury takes about 4 to 6 hours on a police shooting. This tried on for 6 weeks. They brought my wife in there, and my wife and I have been together since first day of 10th grade, 1980. And then we were married for 7 years. But when this happened, we'd been divorced for a number of years in between. The shooting happened, we were divorced. We wound up getting remarried after. But yeah, they brought in girlfriends that I'd had, and they're like calling me. They're calling my attorneys. I got on with everybody pretty much. And they brought people that had nothing to do with the shooting. They brought in people that I had arrested 5, 4, 6, 7 years before that. You arrested a lot of people. I'm sure some people out there would like to get their digs on you, right? Some bad guys you jammed up somewhere.
And this is just standard procedure that when you're in a police shooting, a grand jury does the investigation, right?
Yeah, in Texas, the DA they have their DA investigators, and then the DAs here they're assigned. Then it was called the what do they call it? The Public Integrity Unit. Yeah, what they called it back then. And yeah, those are some clowns, man. But they at that time they were known for going after officers. And Chuck Lackner, the homicide detective who made the scene of the shooting, I've never talked to that guy, except he asked me a few questions there during my interview. I didn't talk to him until I got out of prison. And what he had to say shocked me. It did, because all these guys were threatened with their careers. He was a lead homicide detective, the detective actually out there. They didn't bring him before the grand jury, the two criminal trials or the civil trial, because he would have said what happened, But they, he did it. I had a guy about 3 years ago, just for interjection here, Michael Tabman. He was a retired supervisor, special agent in charge of FBI. I think he had 26 years at FBI. And he started looking at my case about 3 years ago. He interviewed Malloy, Morong, another federal agent who was involved in polygraphing over all this, which of course I passed, and a homicide detective. And what they said was, was eye opening, to say the least. We've had a number of people, and he also interviewed Michael Tabman also interviewed Michael Schaefer, the informant, for an hour and 15 minutes. But it's we'll get that down the way. But anyway, but as far as going back to work, I went back to work every day. I didn't even take a sick day, a vacation day, nothing. And then I get called in the grand jury. Anytime in Texas, anytime an officer injures or kills somebody, it's just SOP. But this wasn't SOP because their grand jury was going for weeks before I even got called in there. And everybody's calling us. People saying, man, call my lawyers. Hey, they're calling me. They're calling my wife. Not my wife, but the other officers' wives. And people had nothing to do with shooting, had no knowledge of the shooting, And so they called me in there, and I was in there, I think, 4 hours and 45 minutes for the grand jury. It was ridiculous. I don't know if I sent you the pictures now of the grand jury, but for the weapon that Susan Light, the suspect, pointed at me, they gave me this little tiny Raven 25 automatic. I don't see what you can see, about this big, with pink grips on it, just to make this because they were gunning for me, absolutely gunning for me. And I said, this is ridiculous. This looks nothing like we'll act like it is the weapon that she had, So making it in front of the grand jury, it looked like a toy, And then they asked me ridiculous questions. And then I was there for 4 hours and 45 minutes. And at the end, the prosecutor, Ed Porter, that guy, he asked the grand jury, is anybody a question for me? This one old guy said they're like in an L-shaped desk, and I was sitting in a chair in the front. I'm a big L-shaped table. And then there was an older white guy on the end. He was just staring at me the whole time. And he goes, "You have some questions." I was in uniform at this point. He goes, "Why didn't you fall back and call SWAT?" And I said, "Look, man, this isn't HPD. This is sheriff. We don't have SWAT. We were basically SWAT. There's no SWAT to call, And I explained to him. Then he said, "Well, why didn't you shoot the gun out of her hand?" I said, "Well, why do you obviously watch stupid Hollywood movies? That's ridiculous. That's technically it's against the law to do that. If I'd have fired, if she wasn't going to shoot, the gun could have gone off and shot me. That's just ridiculous,
Right. And that's one of the problems that arises when you have these juries or civilian review boards is the other popular thing that's kind of come up throughout the years, where you have people that are untrained in law enforcement and they've got unrealistic expectations. Like you're saying, they want units that don't exist in your department to come save the day, or they want you to do things that are illegal, not tactical or practical, in order to resolve the situation, like crap they see on cowboy movies.
Yeah, exactly. But they it was ridiculous, man. But let me back up a little bit, because I had there was a major with the sheriff's department who's in command of the patrol bureau. He basically ran the sheriff's department back then. And he and I and a handful of other supervisors, we had a business that we had. It was legitimate, business. It was like two, maybe 3 weeks after the shooting, and we're all in a meeting talking about this business deal, right? And the major goes, "Well, how do you go with a psych when you're shooting?" Because like in big city departments like Houston, they have their entire psychological division. The sheriff's department didn't even have one. They contracted with some guy, And then I said, "I didn't go. Nobody said anything about it, man." He said, "What?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You been at work this whole time?" I said, "Yeah." And so he wrote an address down. He said, "I'm gonna make a call. Be at this address at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning." So I showed up, and it was a psychologist where he was. I talked to her for about 15 minutes, and then I did the MMPI test. It's very lengthy. It gauge if you're psychologically having issues or whatnot. It's,
Right.
Many hundreds of questions. They evaluate it. So I took the test. Took, I don't know, a few hours. And we talked to the guy for about 45 minutes, and he said, "Let me, do this, your outcome." And he came back in a little bit later, and he said, "Hey, man, you're right, flat lined, doing okay, I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I'm gonna go ahead and okay you to go back to work." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Yeah, so you can go back to work if you want." I said, "I've been at work." That dude, what? He could not believe I'd been at work. They didn't give me a day off, not one. Even when I asked for it, they would not give me a day off.
Yeah, and that's again that's just mind blowing and irresponsible on their department. And a question that it's actually my co-author and brother Brian Santana wanted to ask, is when you knew about the grand jury,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm guessing that you thought there's going to be some issues, especially after you talked with them for 4 hours
Mm-hmm.
or over 4 hours. How did that impact your life? Were you stressed about that? Is that affecting
Hell yeah,
your family
because
life?
there was already keys that something was going on about the suspect's weapon. The fingerprints been wiped off of it, and I guess we need to delve into this situation. When I went to work at the SO, I hired on. I was an instructor, and there was an administrative sergeant that worked in the jail. I never worked for him. His name was John Denholm. And back then, it was very corrupt. Back then, there was a clique of a major, the rank of major, a bureau commander, and he had his little group in there with him, and they were pulling all kind of shenanigans. And if you stood up to these guys, man, they would go after you. And his Denholm, when he was a sergeant, never my sergeant, but I caught him tampering my payroll and another deputy's payroll one time. And I should have arrested him. This probably would have never happened. But I just had words with him. He was a big, overweight, slovenly, loudmouth bully. He was especially bullying the rookies around. And I didn't tolerate that, man. And neither did this other deputy.
So they're skimming off the payroll, or what are they doing?
I don't know what he was doing, but he was trying to screw us on our payroll. And they're involved in all kind of stuff going on, man. It was insanity what was going on at that place. When I was with Houston PD, it might have been going on. I never saw stuff at the city. I went to the county, just the way they handled people and beating the shit out of people. I've seen, employees stealing stuff from, witnesses and stuff. I saw some crazy stuff going on there, And my Lieutenant Coons, he was by the book as me. Neither one of us, liked that stuff. But if you bucked up to that group, which I did, and so did their deputy. And then lo and behold, boom, I get in the shooting. Like 2 days later, that major that Denholm was part of that clique. 2 days after the shooting, this major promotes Denholm to lieutenant and puts him in homicide over my case. Knowing there's a 2-year history of this idiot, right? And that's who investigated my case. And then lo and behold, my partner at work, guess who investigated his case? They set him up on a sexual assault when even the suspect said, this is completely consensual. We don't care, So my partner got sent to TDC, Texas prison, for 17 years. He did over these guys. There's another deputy in there, Marcus Fleck. He's got 10 years and 3 40-year sentences stacked on him by these guys. It wasn't just me they're going after. Anybody who would stand up to this little group in there and the commands, they'd go after them, And at that point, when I got indicted, and the shooting was in August, I got indicted in October. Well, elections were coming up in November. I got indicted on October 28, 92. And at the elections back then, the Johnny Holmes district attorney, big boisterous guy, been attorney for DA for I don't know how many years. And then the sheriff, they despise each other. They're always accusing each other of corruption, which are both right, but trying to jam each other up. So when I worked for the sheriff, I get in this shooting, the DA's trying to make the sheriff look bad. So I got thrown in that political storm too, in the middle of all that mess. But that Denholm, that dude was, he was the main player in this. And then at the shooting scene, I told her that the 2 district assistant DAs on the Civil Rights Division, it was called at that point. It was Ed Porter and Don Smith, a judge, and Steve Clappert was our DA investigator. This is Clappert's 3rd day on the job, and they made a big issue about me working for, other agencies. Clappert's worked at, I think, 8 or 9 agencies and been fired for every one of them, including twice being fired from the district attorney's office for corruption. We made national news. By the way, so did Denholm. Denholm, a new district attorney, took office about 9 years ago. First day in there, hired Clappert and Denholm, and wound up firing both of them quite shortly afterward for corruption. And Steve Clappert, the DA investigator, was putting a bunch of Klansman stuff on social media. Not a bright idea.
No,
and
that's
then
not.
then Denholm got fired for refusing to take sexual assault charges because the victim was an illegal alien. Yeah, true. When he refused to take charges against the suspect. Yeah, that made national news.
So
And the
you've got
DA
a
fired
lot
him.
going on in that department.
Yeah.
at some point, do they come to your house and place you under arrest and process you, or what's the
No,
kind of the next step after you're indicted?
yeah, that's a good aspect too. I think it was during the grand jury, I get called by Detective Kyle Brown, Georgia homicide, and I lived about an hour and a half away from downtown Houston, and he said, "Hey, I got a warrant. They want to come get your clock." And I was like, "What?" And then I said, "Hey, I'll just come meet." I knew the guy. We were friends. I knew who he was. I said, I'll meet you halfway. You don't drive away." Like, "No, man, don't worry about it." And then he shows up at my house, and he had a warrant for the Glock. But I dropped the magazine, no rounds, and he said, "Hey, they need the bullets in the magazine. It's not. Well, they need to get a warrant." You know. So he was kind. I could tell he felt like shit, man. He was just like, "Man, this is not good." Everybody knew I was getting set up. Everybody knew I was getting set up.
And just to be clear, this is so they took the pistol from you at the shooting, right?
Right.
When did they give it back to you?
That's all great. Yeah. It was like maybe 3 or 4 nights later. Okay, Deputy Reinhardt was a crime scene investigator, the CSU that made the shooting the night of the shooting, he made the
Right.
scene. He took no fingerprints, he took no photographs, he took no video, he took no measurements. He didn't do a trace metal test on the
Right.
decedent, which would
And
have proved
this
the hand
is
that killed him.
right.
Yeah,
And
he took
this
no
is an active
fingerprints.
investigation.
Correct.
And
He
so they
did.
take your pistol. Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt you, but they
No,
take.
no.
I'm just blown away by this.
Mhm,
That they take your pistol, which is the absolute right thing to do in an
mhm.
officer-involved shooting, right? That should
Right,
have been processed, placed into evidence, and kept until the investigation is over. But instead, they clearly the investigation is not over because you've got a grand jury that's indicting you,
right, right.
but they give you your pistol back.
They gave me my pistol back about 3 days after the shooting. They did a ballistics on it. And then they gave my pistol back, and I went down there to get my went down to get it from Reinhardt works night shift also. Let me back up just have a second here. After the morning of the shooting, Reinhardt worked night shift. He got off at 6. He left one of the bullets that I fired in the wall. He didn't recover the I didn't know that she was wearing glasses at the time, the suspect shooting. He left those there. He didn't take the TV converter box, the bullet. He didn't take any evidence. He didn't even take the clothing of the suspect or the bedding because the DA's office they said that in front of these officers I didn't know, these deputies I didn't know, that I shot the suspect in the face, then walked up to her, shot her in the arm, walked up to her, and I stood over for a coup de grace through the chest as I stood over in front of these two deputies I didn't know, which you were, what, 21 years, whatever, as a police officer. There was, finally they went back because I don't get to that, but there's no GSR, there's no gunshot residue on the bedding on the foot of the bed because they went back and got it later. There was no gunshot residue, nothing on the suspect. So I was at least 4 feet from the foot of the bed at the time of the shooting, which I was in the doorway back. And and then another what six I was they said I was no less than 11 feet from her time of the shooting. And when she was coming, when I saw her, when she was beelining going right to left across the door, she was in there getting the gun at that point, and it was recovered later. The boxer she bought the gun at Champion's Pawn Shop and had the ATF 4473 form in it, where she lied because she was a convicted felon, a drug addict, an alcoholic. You have to check off knowing all this. Been in
Right.
mental institution. She lied all that, and her own son, Jason Aguilar, he even said in his statement that his mother bought the gun to quote blow Ron's fucking head off. That was her husband who had left her for a 17. He was 56, left her for a 17-year-old who he had a kid with. Whole different story on that one. But they were quite a mess, that family. But get back to the grand jury. They dragged my wife in there, and she's like, "I have nothing to do with it. I don't have anything to say." And she said, "I'm not saying anything. And they said, "That's fine. We'll take you for the judge right now and have you thrown in jail for contempt of court." She says, "I know nothing about this. But
Right.
anyway,
Clearly, your wife wasn't at the scene.
no, neither were 90% of the people they called in. They
Right.
called in, and there was people
Right.
out there, I didn't know who they were. They did the same thing at trial, which we'll get to. I didn't know any of these people were at trial.
I wanted
But
to get to one more thing that I've got
mhm,
a question about. when you're talking about how poorly the scene was processed,
Mhm.
do you know of how long they held that crime scene and when it was released?
They never did. No.
They never
And
held it?
negative. At the night of the shooting, which the photographs we got, which I'll get to when I recovered more than 100,000 pages of documents and evidence. Since I've been out, they withheld all this from us. There's seen photos in there, and some of these I've seen the scene photos before. And there's a guy wearing raggedy blue jeans, pair of raggedy tennis shoes. And my lawyer's investigator went, look, that was a neighbor from across the street. Well, homicide, internal affairs, DA, everybody's in there, ambulance crews, the neighbors are walking through the house, moving everything around. And then when when Reinhardt, the CSU was there, the bullet that hit her across the face punched through the headboard, punched through the sheetrock and fell between the sheetrock and the brick. He left that there. So when Sergeant Skiller, I think he was a crime scene supervisor, and I think her name was Dalrymple, was another deputy who was with him, a CSU investigator. They went back to the house the next day. The house was unlocked. People were in the house moving around, and at this point, the people, the CSU day shift guys, they came in, they drained the waterbed and moved it, and they cut out a 2 foot by 2 foot section of sheetrock to get the bullet out, and then I don't know if they moved the bed back, whatever. But 5 days after that, Clappert, the investigator, set me up, and his buddy John Denholm, and then the two DAs, assistant DAs. 5 days after this, the husband and his teenage wife and their baby had moved in. All the furniture had been moved around. Plus, the crime scene guys had gone and drained the waterbed and moved it. Well, they go in there to do their measurements, right? Everything's been moved. Nothing.
Right. And that's why none of those tests that they're doing afterwards
Mhm.
are even relevant at this point.
Right. Well, yeah,
Because
but it was in trial. Yeah, they brought it in trial. They
and
literally
and
had
that's
they
that would
literally
not
had
fly today.
strings. Yeah, they literally had strings going from where the bed had been moved around and to where they think I was standing. They said I had to be shooting from like 5'7" the gun was, which is pretty much eye level anyway. So I was trying to say I was right on top of her when I was gunning her down as poor innocent housewife was begging for mercy.
But that's my whole this is
Mhm.
all fantasy measurements because you're
Yeah.
basing your measurements off spots that you're guesstimating in a house
Yeah.
of where you're standing. They had no clue of where you were standing
Everything had been
because they
moved
didn't
around.
process
Yeah.
the scene properly the first time.
Right. And my best friend since high school, it's a pseudonym, but in the book, Stead Bingham is his pseudonym because he has a political, career right now. But he's been a crime scene investigator for nearly 40 years. We've been best friends since high school. And he, of course, he looked on this just, on my side, but he was saying, they had lasers even back then. But during my first trial, when they put Deputy Reinhardt, the crime scene investigator, who at that time he'd never been trained. He was like the commissary guy in the jail. He'd never been trained in crime scene investigation when he totally screwed up this scene. And then he testified there was some coke splatter on the wall from whatever happened. That he could tell if that was blood or if it was Dr. Pepper or whatever. But he testified at the scene, and they had that 2 foot by 2 foot section that the crime scene guys had removed. The night later that morning of the shooting, it was about 10 o'clock in the morning. And 5 days later, remember the guys that set me up went in there where everything was moved and made their fantasy string theory type situations. Well, they put Steve Clapper, the D investigator, who's there making those measurements on the scene. And the prosecutor was asking, well, what angle did you determine through your training and experience where McGowan was standing at times of shooting? He was saying these bizarre angles and in distances. So my lawyers are looking at each other. Hell, this is my first trial in '94. So my lawyer got Clapper on the stand, and he said, "Well, you went in and took measurements from where the cable converter box was to the headboard, to the hole in the wall behind it." And oh yeah, Clapper. Oh yeah. And he said, "Well, how did you do that?" And he goes, "Well, I put my pin through the wall, through the headboard, and then through the wall." He said, "You use your pen to do it?" And he goes, "Oh, actually, I had a wooden dowel in my pocket." He goes, "You carry a wooden dowel around with you?" And he said, "Well, yeah." There was a 2 foot by 2 foot section behind the headboard at this point.
Right.
So my lawyer's like looking, and we're looking like, what the hell? It's kind of cold to commit aggravated perjury. And that 2 foot by 2 foot section is sitting on the DA's table 15 feet from where he's testifying. He's too stupid to even see it sitting there. Of course, obviously they didn't give a heads up on this. So anyway, he said, yes, I took the wooden dowel out. This was Steve Clapper. And he said, I put the wooden dowel through the hole in the headboard, through the bullet hole in the back of the wall. My lawyer goes, well, was there any construction going on in the room? No. And he said, well, was the whole wall there? And he said, yeah. And he goes, well, how big? He goes, could you look behind there? And he goes, yeah, I looked behind there and saw the bullet hole. And he goes, well, how big was that hole? He goes, oh, it's a sergeant large caliber handgun. It was, 10 millimeter. Completely committing aggravated perjury. So of course they didn't put him on at the federal trial, which we won, the civil trial, or the second one. But the stories about those two guys, man, stalking my family for years and years. If you want, we can get into that. What they, man, harassing my wife, breaking into my house, trespassing my family's ranch, expressing how they can't wait for the gunfight at the McGowen compound, which is right after the big mess at the Davidian compound down here in Waco. The ATF mess up. These guys are gunning for us, man.
Well, let's get back to where we were in this case, and that was that I know that we talked about the indictment.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of left off before we went down several rabbit holes about of how they got a search warrant for your gun.
Mm-hmm.
At what point were you actually taken into custody?
As I said, at this point, I had Tuesday and Wednesdays off, and it was on maybe 2 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon. Major Wiedemeyer of the Patrol Bureau that was helping me, he called me on my phone. Well, my beeper. No, he called me on my phone. And he's talking somewhat quietly. He goes, hey, can you hear me? And I said, yes, sir. He goes, hey, I need you to come down to internal affairs. And I said, all right. And he whispered quieter, and he said, bring your attorney. And I said, all right. So I called Bob Thomas, one of my union lawyers. He's retired Houston PD sergeant, great guy. And Bob, he kind of laughed. He said, hey, man, he goes, come get me. Don't go by it. That's all right. So I went to his office. He said, hey, look, man, all this crazy, the political stuff, whatever. He said, they're going to probably suspend you for maybe 3 days. We just call them fishing days. And he said, hey, just don't worry. We'll get your money back, And so Bob and I go down to the detective bureau, which is in a separate building. And we went to go up into the internal affairs captain's office. Well, the major's sitting in the ID captain's chair behind his desk. ID captain standing to the right, homicide captain to the left. And there's a big, heavy-set, older detective I've never seen talk to before since. I go in there, and the major said, hey, McGowan, sit down. So I was like, yes, sir. And then he said, I don't know how to tell you this, man. He said, they dropped down a sealed indictment on you today. And my lawyer's like, what? Because he was a policeman's policeman, Bob Thomas was. And the major's looked at me and said, on murder. In a split second,
take your time.
In a split second, I went from being, a decorated police officer, my entire life's goal and career, being an accused murderer on an insane situation, And I literally feel like I was struck across the chest with a baseball bat. I mean, I didn't say anything. I just stared at the major, like, I was like, I'm sure he didn't say what I thought. So Bob Thomas, he loses it, man. And he said, you're not handcuffing him, No. And that old detective sitting there, he said, let me tell you something, Deputy McGowan. He said, I've been doing this, I think he said 46 years. He said, 42 years I've spent in internal affairs and homicide. He goes, I made thousands of shootings. I made hundreds of police shootings, man. He said, this is the cleanest shoot I've ever seen. He said, you had a valid signed lawful warrant from somebody, a judge, a very well-known judge. He said, you had 2 officers you didn't even know as witnesses. You tried to get that sergeant to go with you. He said, the handgun she pulled on you, he said she illegally bought it. We knew they had the 4473. They did. And he said, yeah, her own son gave a statement she bought it to murder her husband with, And he said, what scares the shit out of me? He goes, what scares the shit out of me? Because that could be any one of the 8,500 officers in this county sitting right there, And so, but Bob Thomas, man.
Stop you for 1 second here, 'cause I've got a question about something that one of our viewers brought up. And she was saying how this destroyed your family.
Yes.
Thanks, Melissa, for that. My question is, when this happened, when you're going into this, is your family aware of what's going on, or are you hiding that from them? And I don't know if hiding is
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, neither way. I have a brother who did 31 years on the job. Impeccable, reputation.
right.
Always looked up to him. And then he and I talked, but during this whole time, nobody in my family had ever been to jail. I never had a parking ticket. I mean, nobody in my family's had, any legal issues. A lot of veterans, law enforcement and whatnot. And in my family, they didn't know what to do, you know. And we knew, man, because those days went out trespassing at the ranch, and man, the stalking of my wife, going to my children's school. They were like first, second, third grade. We were in private school, and they were trying to get to my kids and
Well, we'll
interviewing
get to that
neighbors.
in a second,
Yeah,
but at this point, you've got you just learned about the indictment,
right.
and do they take you into custody and process you, or what
Well,
happens next?
yeah, kind of. They, Bob Thomas, my lawyer, saying, "You are not." They're saying, "We're not cuffing him," and they hadn't released my name to the media yet. Or I don't think they even released the story at this point. So we get out and get it. We get like 4 cool cars, just undercover cars, whatever you want to call them. And we travel. It's maybe a 10-minute drive from there to the sheriff's department. So we go in. I don't go to booking or anything. I go and do the ID captain, the ID division commander captain. I don't remember his name. Older guy. And I'm sitting there. I didn't know what's going on. They just told me, "Hey, sit here with this captain," right? I remember the guy looked at me and goes, "Let me tell you something, Gowan." He said, "You and I made history in Texas." And I said, "How's that?" He goes, "I got indicted, and I got convicted on a shooting like 30 something years ago." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "How'd it work out for you?" And he goes, "I've been here 36 years." He goes, "Man, this is bullshit. Don't worry about it." Oh, well, so anyway, they took my picture in the captain's office, did my fingerprints, you know. Of course, I think I called my dad. They were trying to get out of 10. They gave me, first they wanted $100,000 bond, the DA. The judge said, absolutely not. $10,000 bond, right? So I go get back in the patrol car, the cool cars, we call them. And we went back to the Sheriff's Detective Bureau, where all the homicide, robbery, and all those are. Man, the media was everywhere, but they had not released my picture. So, I was in my truck, and I picked up my my lawyer. So we kind of beeline it through the media and get in the truck, and take off. And then it started from there, man. It started from there.
And you
Yeah.
say it started from there. You're talking about the harassment of your family?
Right. Yeah. We all received death threats. I had dead fish in the mailbox, had our window shot out of the house, brake lines cut, tires and vehicles cut, constant stalking of my children, all my family members. My dad was in the oil and gas business for 45 years, I guess, at that point, ruined that. They started investigating my dad, who's never done one thing. He's passed on because of the stress of this. But they destroyed our entire family. I mean, my case isn't like I see this all the time because I've become somewhat of an advocate, for this stuff, especially since I've been out. And there's a lot of innocent people in prison, man, and a lot of policemen. And everyone, the policemen I deal with, Eric Holtzclaw, Brian Franklin, a bunch of them out here, Texas and other states, all of us have the same common thread almost every time. Someone within our own agency we have personal issues with set us up. And I've had media people, whatever, say, "Man, that'd be like a big grand conspiracy." No, not. If you have somebody within that agency that just has an issue with you, they have access to evidence, manufacture it, tamper it, destroy with it.
Right.
With witness statements. They suborn aggravated perjury. We've had witnesses come forward. They were threatened, paid off. I mean, all kind of stuff that's coming out. That's how they do. They're, man, not to jump ahead, but just real quick. When I was in prison, we'd like watch Cops. All the bad guys watched Cops and America's Most Wanted back then. And all the inmates would go, "Oh yeah, it's fucking set up," And there's like a couple other officers in there. We'd always root for the good guys, We'd tell them the law, this and it. And I'll tell these prisoners, because all the guards told them what it was. We'll get into that later, but I tell you, it's not the patrolman on the street. It's not the police officer. It's not the deputy that's jamming people up, putting some people in prison. There's blue collar guys going out there, putting their lives on the line to protect people, doing their job. It's these freaking prosecutors. It's these prosecutors. They're the ones that, as you know, they have unlimited finances, investigative techniques. I mean, they have unlimited money. They do what they want and get away with it all the time. I see this every day, every day. Social media, innocent people getting out every day. But anyway, don't get me on that soapbox.
No, no,
Oh,
it's
I'm a
fine.
big loud mouth. I'm a big loudmouth when it comes to that defending people. I
No,
see. I know what happens. I
and
tell
look,
people,
there are plenty of
yeah,
crappy cops out there.
yeah,
I worked with 2 people that are in federal prison right now, and they honestly deserve to be there. You know,
mhm,
one of them was on my squad. He was, um, arresting high-level gang members that had, large quantities of crack and coke on him, and then taking it and reselling it himself. And he eventually
yeah,
got caught by the DEA with it in his trunk. So, you know what? He deserves to be in federal jail, and he deserves every day that he got. And I
mhm,
don't feel any pity for him, but you're absolutely right. There are unfortunately several police officers that are still in prison
mhm,
because of crimes that they did not do.
right,
And so I wanted to get back on track here, and you eventually get a trial date. I know you get
right,
a lawyer.
right.
You get a very high priced lawyer, right?
Well, yeah. Well, at this point, I had Clint Greenwood, my union lawyer that made the scene. He
Okay.
was with me in Texas with the grand jury. You can't have a lawyer come in there with you, and you're at the mercy of the DAs. They can do whatever they want in there. And the grand jurors in Texas, they're picked by judges. So you have these old judge, and he picks his old golfing buddies and all. That's who sits on these grand juries in Texas. It's insane down here. So if you go to grand jury, they want you. You're getting indicted. But but Brian Beacon was Clint Greenwood's business law partner, and they were there, sit waiting outside for the grand jury, and then they were with me there to represent me in my first trial. They were just because they were both prosecutors. Actually, Clint was in the a former prosecutor in the division, the civil rights division, that prosecuted me. But those I have nothing negative to say about those guys, man. They do what they could. They were lied to. They're outgunned. They trust the guys at DA. As a matter of fact, Clint got assassinated on April 3rd. It was on my birthday, 2017. Yeah, by some crazy guy. But they did what they could to help me. And it was just a charade. It was a joke. When I'm sitting there at trial, both trials, the federal trial, I really didn't care about, but it was bizarre. I was sitting there just, I couldn't imagine that all this that was going on around me was because of me, not because of me, because of the suspect, but the situation I was involved in. It was just bizarre. It was like, I don't know. Is this actually real? And I watched, a lot of stuff, and I see defendants sitting there, that same look on their face, like, is this even happening? You know, and I wasn't like, I didn't go to prison. I didn't get indicted, convicted, sent to prison for nearly 20 years. It wasn't an overzealous prosecutor. It wasn't a misidentification. It wasn't, sloppy investigation. The same thing as other guys, the same guys from the same sheriff's department I was with, that are still in prison, some of them. They were intentionally, maliciously set up by these guys, and sent to prison. And they've yet to be held accountable, which they are with this book, and hopefully civilly and criminally it's headed their way.
Can you go through of like what was the prosecution's narrative of what happened that day?
Yeah, well, because they knew I did nothing wrong, they convicted me on character assassination, you know, because everybody knows got people who don't like him, you know, and they intimidated. Actually, the Ed Porter, the main prosecutor, he called Houston PD, the sheriff, all the constables, surrounding agencies, talked to all the sheriffs, constables, chiefs, whatever, and told them don't let no police officers go to my trial because uh, it would unduly influence the jury, because they didn't want any officer there backing me up. Man, they brought just people on there, and I'm like, who are these people? People I've arrested I hadn't seen in 6, 7, 8. No idea. I've arrested hundreds and hundreds of people. Well, he treated me rough on the street. He was asked, and they had 5 police officers that had personal issues with me out of the hundreds and hundreds that I knew. You know, they wouldn't put any of them up there. They wouldn't allow any of them up there to back me up. You know, they brought Malloy and Morong up there. They told exactly what happened, as they do this day. And then, like I told you about Steve Clappert lying on the stand. And then they, in my first trial, it had an all white male jury in my first trial, but so one female. And during, voir dire, they asked, do you know anybody involved in the trial or whatever? Oh, no, no, no. We find out after the trial, the one female that was a juror, not only was she a lawyer and didn't tell us about that, she's worked at the DA's office for Ed Porter, the guy prosecuted. I guess she slept and forgot to tell us that when, during jury selection. Yeah.
And what was the result of the first trial?
I got found guilty. I think it was on a Thursday, and found guilty, which was a blow. And then the DA's office wanted $1 million bond for me to come back the next morning. And the judge said for everybody numerous times throughout the whole pre-trial hearings and during at the trial. Great judge. He's an older judge. He was a POW in World War II. But Judge Azios, he said, there's no way I'm sending you to prison if the law allowed me to keep you out. He knew I was getting set up, And so there was what got my case overturned was many, many things. The one that you only need one. Once they're 3-on-1, the other stuff doesn't really matter. But the state didn't want to do an opening argument. So when they did their case in chief, my attorneys did an opening argument and they objected. They said, we didn't do it, they can't do it, which is, everybody knows, state and federal law, you have a right to do an opening argument. But anyway, so I got found guilty, and the judge said, Mr. McGowan, you'll be back at 9:00 tomorrow morning for sentencing, yes, sir. And back then in the state of Texas, if you got 15 years or less, you could stay on an appellate bond. And we already had the bondsman there just in case, So he came back and they gave me 15 years, So I know I wasn't going to jail. So we're glad, and nobody knew what was going on, and never set foot in jail, Then the judge called me up. I'll never forget this. Judge Azios called me up, and my two attorneys, Greenwood and Binkin, and he said, you need to get you a real, you need to get a real lawyer and take this up on appeal and get this off of you. I don't know why I said this. I remember like it was yesterday. I said, who do you recommend? He said, well, ethically, the judge said, ethically, I can't make a recommendation, but Greenwood and Beacon know who to call. So we went out to the payphone, and this on Friday for sure. And we called George McCall Sechrest, Max Sechrest, appellate lawyer. And he was my lawyer for about 9 years. He got my case overturned 4 out of 4 times. And that's when we went back to second trial. First trial was in 94. Second trial was in 2002. February 94 and March of 2002. Yeah.
And can you tell us of what happened in the second trial?
Yeah, after all the crazy stuff that went on, I mean, that prosecutor stalking us and showing up at my kids' schools, we'd go out and eat, he'd be there. That went on for all those years. And until finally a major incident occurred, the judge ordered him to stay away from us, but he didn't. So anyway, they kept saying they're not going to retry me. Because even the DA's all said they thought there's no way I was going to get convicted the first time. So we go to trial the second time. We won all the appeals. And then I had a wealthy uncle who said, look, this is destroying the family. I'm going to write the check. You go talk to the top 5 lawyers in Harris County, narrow down to 3, and we'll make a decision. So I went and talked to the top lawyers. I wanted Max Sechrest, my appellate attorney, because all the Brady violations, all he'd come across, he said, I can't tell you we're not going to trial. There's a good chance you won't. But he asked for an enormous amount of cash up front, which we should have paid. I was not going to, it would have been less expensive when they were going to prison.
Right.
But we wound up getting second biggest mistake of my life. Wound up hiring Dan Cogdell, big lawyer in Houston. And I just heard his name. I've seen him around the courthouse a couple of times, his reputation. I went and met with him and his another attorney that worked for him, his law firm, who we've reached out to in the last couple of years. The stuff he has to say on our side. But then there was Jeff Becker was his investigator at the time. And then there was a couple of females there, paralegals or whatever. He gave me this big spiel about, that was his, his office, which it wasn't. Come to find out he had not practiced in a year due to a paternity situation he had to take care of financially. And I wound up hiring this guy, man, biggest mistake of my life. I hired him in March. Hang on just a second. Hang on, I'm going to have to plug in my phone here. Okay, hang on just a second.
Yep, you're fine.
We went to warm up here. Let's see if I can balance this back up.
So just give a recap. You haven't actually gone to jail yet.
No, never.
But you're out on essentially a bond, and you've got an attorney that you believe is going to help you win your case. He's one of the top 5 supposedly in the county.
Yeah.
And so you're assuming that things are on the right track, and your expectations are very high for a good outcome, right?
At the very beginning, yeah. And then my uncle and I went and met with him, and we got, hang on, I have a problem with my camera thing here. We went and met with his attorney, and he put on a big show, was absolutely not honest about anything involved in this. Hang on, so I'm going to try to fix my camera here so I get this right.
No, you're fine.
Yeah, had some technical. Hey, I was gone for 20 years. I'm still working on this technology stuff.
You're doing great with it. So,
But anyway, yeah. But anyway, he gave us this big dog and pony show. So we wind up, hang on just a second. We wind up paying him an enormous amount of money. My uncle did. Paying this guy an enormous amount of money. And he told me that every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I'm just about to hold this thing, that every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday was going to be McGowen time from 3 to 5. We never once did that. We never went over the case, nothing. And he called me to go to his office, and he was friends with a couple of famous guys in a restaurateur. All we did was go to this restaurant, and they would smoke expensive cigars and drink. That's all we ever did. Did nothing to prepare for trial. 11 days prior to trial, 11 months after I hired him, I remember I was with my wife. We're at the house. Kids are at school. We're talking about this. She's like, "This guy's no good, man. You're going to get jammed up." I said, "I know it." And so I, right then the phone rings. It's Jeff Becker, Cogdale's investigator. And he said, "Hey, man, I need you to meet me at Cadillac Bar." It was down by this building that Dan told me was his own office building. At this point, it wasn't. And Jeff said, he said, "I need to meet me at Cadillac Bar. I need to talk to you." So I knew by his tone. I hung up the phone. I told Michelle, I said, "Man, I'm going to prison. This is not good." Right. And so I go down and meet Jeff. We have a couple of Lone Stars, a couple of cheeseburgers. And he looks at me, he said, "Man," he said, "you're fucked. You're going to prison." I said, "Man, what the hell's going on?" He said, "Dan," he told me that Cogdale owed my investigator at that point $136,000 in fees that Dan had not paid him. That they're about to cut the phones off, and the secretaries hadn't been paid in more than a month. And he's about to get kicked out of that office. And then he told me, he said, he has not read one document. Which he didn't. He's not talked to one witness involved in the case. 11 days prior to my trial on a murder case, my life's on the line. He's gonna say I'm pissed, So I smoke out of the restaurant, just trying to catch me. Hang on. So I got to the office first, and I go there and slam Dad's, his office door open. Went in there. We went at it, And he's all, "I'll tell you, we got 11 days. We got 11 days." He did nothing. The only witness that he talked to in 11 months from the time I hired him until my family paid him hundreds of thousands of dollars. And Cogdale spoke with one witness this whole time. He's talked to Michael Schaefer, the informant, the key witness in all this. He talked to Michael Schaefer for less than an hour in a restaurant the Sunday night before my trial started Monday morning. He had no clue. So we go to trial. He literally didn't know who the witnesses were on the stand. We go to trial, and he gives me a legal pad and a stack of Post-it notes. And he's telling me, he said, "Hey," he said, "write down any questions, whatever." I'm writing down who the witnesses are on the stand and the questions to ask him. I kept doing that for like 2 days, and finally he grabs me out in the hallway and he said, "Hey, quit doing that. You're making me fucking look bad, man." Look bad, man. My life's on the line. You're worried about how you look, And then it came time for Morong and Lloyd to testify, the two guys that were with me, right? And they told me, said, "Hey, don't talk to any witnesses or whatever." Sorry. So, we're all standing out there, wrong and Lloyd got off the elevator. Excuse me, I went up and shake their hands and say, I just talked to them in 10 years, I say, hey, you guys all right? Yeah, man, how you doing? And I said, ready to get this over with, man. I said, you guys ready to go? And they said, we don't know. And I said, what do you mean? He said, we never even talked to your lawyer. Cogdale's standing right there. I said, what? And they said, yeah. So I grabbed Dan, pushed him around the corner in the hallway. I said, you never even talked to Wrong and Malloy. The two deputies that witnessed this stuff, man. Witnessed it,
Two of the
And
only witnesses, too.
Yeah. And he said, well, I got the reports. That was 10 years ago. He did nothing to defend me, nothing. And then there were, due to legal maneuverings going at this time, there's things I can't discuss about it. I can just say this much. He was struggling with issues at the time that were highly inappropriate, very well known throughout the law community in Harris County. And they terribly
you
affected
told me
the
about
situation.
these issues off air, and
Yeah.
we'll just say that you've lost confidence in your lawyer at this point because
To
of
say the very
things
least. Say the very
that you believe are going on in his personal life,
Correct.
and also affecting his professional life, right? These are things that you're witnessing. And so
Yes, I've
you really
witnessed it.
lost confidence in your ability to stay a free person.
I knew I was sunk. I knew it. Because he didn't know what to ask the witnesses. He didn't. And later in years, which I don't know how long we have, but later in years, we came across a document when we got that more than 100,000 pages. We call it the Cogdell Confession Letter, and it was a personal letter he wrote to my writ lawyer. Admits every bit of this. But obviously, I was found guilty. I got found guilty there, and then that judge. I don't know if it's true because Dan's told me this about many high-profile people. He told me he went to law school with the judge that I had the second time, and they would argue in front of the jury. They would argue, and then at this time, Ed Porter was still prosecuting me, and a little Weasley lawyer named prosecutor Vic Weisner, and they were suborning aggravated perjury. Dan called Vic Weisner on the stand of voir dire outside of the jury. If the jury would have been in there and heard what was going on, it would have been a mistrial, But Dan, he knew nothing about the case, nothing. If he had randomly selected half a dozen pages out of those 14 boxes of pages or documents we got, I'd have never gone to trial. And he didn't talk to any police officers that would back me up. I knew hundreds of officers that I got along with, constable, sheriff, HPD officers from other counties. Even my best friends worked in another county.
So would it be sufficient to say that you got convicted based on hearsay and, like you're saying, this is like a character assassination, and one of those was, or one of the things that's been floating around is that you and Susan White had a relationship.
Yeah, that's a story they concocted. And even when it's disproven, they stayed on it. I had seen the suspect 3 times my entire life. She was out running bars and nightclubs and stuff. She might have seen me doing a security check, and I never saw her.
So you've never had sex with her?
No, I've seen her 3 times my entire life.
Okay.
And one, I had
you never had drinks with her?
Never. The only time I ever spoke to that one in my entire life was at the scene of the arrest, 48 hours prior to the shooting. You better get your ass out, or I'm going to arrest you for interfering. The only other thing I ever said to that woman was, drop the gun, I'm going to shoot you. It's the only words I ever spoke to that woman.
So this narrative, and we got at this before, is that you've got this young nurse that you're obsessed with. All that stuff's not true, right?
No. That's another thing. I told my attorneys that you need to put my wife on the stand. You need to put girls I dated, wrongly someone else married, but it was the 80s and 90s, But even when I was divorced for 7 years, just have them come up and say something, and then they would see the suspect, I mean, she had Legionnaire's disease. Besides all her other stuff, her son was a criminal. Tried to burn down the next neighbor's house. They brought him to court shackled because he was in Angola at that time. Actually, both trials he showed up shackled from being in Angola prison in Louisiana. He had terrorized the neighborhood, tried to burn down neighborhoods, the next neighbor's house. This is nobody, any police officer want anything to do with, besides the drugs, the psychoses, and this and that.
Right.
But I saw her 3 times. I had a civilian observer with me who testified to this, and I was coming off another call, and I was driving down TC Jester. She lived right off TC Jester and Amber Forest where the shooting occurred. I saw a patrol car in the driveway. Well, I knew there's so few deputies out there. I knew everybody lived, so I knew a deputy lived there. Well, if a call would have dropped in that beat, I would have got it, So I said, that's weird. So I turned around and parked for the next house. I walked in. The first thing I see was a gun laying there, the one she tried to shoot me with a few weeks later. I looked over at the deputy, and I was sitting on a social call. He was sitting in a lazy boy chair, and a suspect, Susan White, was sitting in the other side of the living room, another chair, and it was my informant was there before he's my informant, and her son, some other teenagers there. And all of them gave statements that I never looked at that woman. She never looked at me. We never said a word to each other. So did the civilian ride along the observer had with me. But she was there just kicking it back with this Matt Smith guy. And then I'm not going to say the name of the book, but it's her tabloid trash book, which a juror brought into the court the first day of my second trial. But it says there that even Susan White said that she was having dating a baby-faced deputy named Matt, M-A-T-T. Well, that deputy was sitting there. His name was Matt. And in that book, she kept saying, well, Susan told her friend or one only friend that she was dating Matt and that they broke up. And Matt taught her how to shoot a gun, which in Matt's statement, he said that was him. And Matt was a boxer and how it took her. And in that book, it even said Matt, but it said, or was it, quote, Mac? My last name is McGowen. I've never gone by Mac. Nobody in my family's ever been called Mac or gone by that. But it was just throwing in all this stuff. But, and then needless to say, Wakanda, certainly, anyway, we can't get that because it's pending, but just his actions and whatever. But I get found guilty, and the judge puts me in jail that night. I think it was on a Friday night, which was it was Easter, my birthday, and my anniversary, all fell on the same day. And so in that weekend, I come back Monday for punishment phase, and they just it was the same old trash, And then they gave me 20 years, so off I went, And then, of course, I did go to jail at that time. And when I went to jail, they didn't want me in county jail because I was an instructor there. I taught a whole lot of people working there. My cousin was a deputy there. They didn't want anything happen to me in that jail, by other inmates. And then they didn't want anybody helping me out somewhere or another. So I went right from there to the James Byrd unit in Huntsville. It's a diagnostic unit where they go, and that's where they classify where you're going, your classification for security and whatnot. And that's where the prison stories began.
Okay, can you tell us? Let's get with that. And the trial could be a whole separate show, but I do want to point out. Hopefully, people caught that part about. There actually was a juror that was reading a book about the case while the trial was going on.
Yes.
And Jerry documented that in his book. But let's fast forward. You get convicted. You're transported to where they processing you and evaluating your security risk, or
yeah. Actually, when I left the courthouse, I knew the deputies, the bailiffs,
right.
And I didn't smoke, but they don't handcuff me or anything. We're walking literally like 2 blocks to the sheriff's department. They said, man, you smoke? I said, no. They said, you better smoke when you'll be smoking for 20 years. So I smoked a Marlboro or whatever. I walked with those guys. Then they put me in county jail. And then they put me in a tank. They called it what do they call it? Cop de con. It was police officers, family members of police officers, I think firefighters, like that. But I wasn't there very long at all. And they shipped me to Texas prison. And they shipped me at night. They always moved me at night, so I didn't know where I was going. I went to 20 different units, and I got bounced around all the time.
So when you go to the Texas prison, can you tell us about that experience when you first get there? I mean, are you scared? Do people know that you're a police officer or a sheriff's deputy?
Yeah, the guards told them every time. Yeah.
So when you walk in, are they are people calling that out or?
Yeah, when I first got there, I went to Bird, and it was built like in 1862 or something, old red brick. I never seen him. I never been in a prison, of
Right.
course. But it was it was a shock. When I first got there, when you first go to unit, they send you to what's called UCC, Unit Classification Committee. She's like a warden or assistant warden and a major or something like that. They kind of go over. But we got them to say, we're putting you in, because they knew I was, of course, the command staff. And they said, we're going to put you in safekeeping, make sure nothing happens to you here. I said, all right. And so, man, that place was bad, dude. People ask me, what was prison like? I tell them it sucked. But Shawshank Redemption is probably the closest thing you'll ever see to a real prison, at least in Texas. That movie's the closest anything.
So what was safekeeping like? Is this where you're?
Yeah, that's they put people that were at risk, or high profile, or maybe being a policeman, and the extremely effeminate homosexuals, to say the least. Like they put them in a third tier. I mean, everybody they scream 24 hours a day. I get up there, and the where they put me in that wing, walking down, and back then the boxers used to have the flies on the back. So there's a bunch of dudes in there that were very effeminate guys, to say the least. Very flagrant homosexuals. And man, they're all bent over, butt cheek spread. Hey, this. I'm like, I thought that's what I was going for 20 years. I had no idea what was going on. That's just intake, right? And I was like, oh, hell no, man. I was the only white guy in there. And then they scream and holler all night. And then,
like the next cell by yourself, or are you?
Yeah, I was in a cell by myself. But I mean, the cells are literally, I think they're 5x7s, not
okay.
4x7s. And you can't see anything. It's just solid walls. And I thought that's what I was going for 20 years. And there was like these real thick glass little tiny window panes. I was on the third floor. I guess there's supply trucks coming in for one thing or another. And I was trying to figure out how to get the hell out of there. I said, there's no way I'm at 20. Oh, hell no. I can't do this for 20 years. And then the next morning, I took us out to shower. And there was like four or five other dudes in the shower. Man, they're all there, taking care of business, staring at me. And I was like, these old prison convict. Oh, hell no. I said, excuse me, I said, I'm not doing this for 20 years. We're going to figure something out, And I was in there about 5 days. And then they come and get me. They said the sheriff's department's coming to get you, take you back to Harris County, which is only like an hour, 20 minutes away, maybe. So I'm like, now what are they going to try to jam me up on? But actually, they sent me down there to sign a legal document for my appellate lawyer. And the deputies came and got me, were sheriff's deputy, Harris County, man. So we get me out, they take the handcuffs off. We go have a Whataburger, to go on the way. Never know, it was the last one I had for 20 years. Then they take me back to the prison, and you go through intake. They do like medical and psychological, and they test your IQ and whatnot. And sociology 1, they ask all about your family, what they do, where they live. I want to tell them jack shit. I want to tell them anything about my family, I guess in case you're going to escape or something, know where to look. I want to tell them jack shit. A few days later, they call me in for sociology 2, and they discuss your case. I'll never forget this. I'm going to say he's about 40 years old, I guess, and she had 4 big, very thick 3-ring binders spread across her desk. She had 2 smaller ones on each side. She calls me in. She goes, "You're McGowan?" I said, "Yes." But she goes, "Have a seat." I said, "I'll stand." I was pissed. I've been asleep like 5 days at this point, not more. But she said, "Let me tell you something." She goes, "I've been doing this 14 years. This is the biggest crock of shit I've ever seen." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah." Well, she starts telling me stuff. She said, "You had a valid warrant, signed by a judge, and the suspect, had a gun registered to her illegally. You had deputies. We did." She's naming off what happened. And I said, "Wait, where are you getting this information?" She goes, "From all these files." I said, "Where are those files from?" "That's not what they said during trial." She says, "This is the DA's files. They had all this, information." And she looks at me and she said, she was Miss McGowan. She was telling me, "You got somebody trying to get you out of this." I said, "Yeah." And then a few days after that, they came and got me. And so you had a legal visit. So I went down there, and it was Jack Zimmerman, an appellate lawyer my family had hired. He was a full bird colonel in the Marine Corps. His daughter, Terry, brilliant lawyers, and that she was a full bird. She's now a full bird colonel in the Marine Corps, but they specialize in self-defense cases. Man, they gave it their all. They absolutely gave it their all. But you're fighting a corrupt system. And during that time period, they knew Cogdell. And they came and visited me a number of times. But I remember one time they said we have statements from Cogdell, saying two separate statements for two different events, that during his mishandling of my case, that what he did was inadvertent and non-strategic. That's legal where I screwed up, you know. And then and I asked them, I said, why would he write these statements? They said, well, one lawyer, there's three lawyers there at that point. One said, he took all that money from your family and didn't do anything, you got convicted. I said, he's a lawyer, he didn't give a shit about that. And the other lawyer said, well, he knows you're innocent, feels bad. He's a scumbag, he didn't care about that. And the other lawyer said, well, he knows eventually you're going to get out of this and you're going to come for him, legally, So, yeah. But, and I told you that letter he wrote to my writ lawyer a few years later, the Cogdell confession, admitted to everything he didn't do. I mean, he doesn't know we have that. Now he's going to know watching this that we have that letter, but I don't think he remembers what was in it. It's it paints him in a very bad light.
Are you referring to
in his
the
handwriting.
document that you sent me where it is essentially him saying like what he should have objected to and et
Right.
cetera? Okay.
Right. Yeah. We call it the Cogdell confession. Not talking to witnesses, not objecting. But anyway, those appeals, my direct appeals lasted maybe 2 years, and then they just you're fighting an impossible battle, especially when you're appeals, especially when you're locked up. You can't be out there working with your lawyers and talking and getting your story out there. And so those appeals, we lost the direct appeal. And Texas filed a PDR, petition for discretionary review, where it goes to the Court of Criminal Appeals, which is the highest appellate court in the state. They weren't hearing it. And so the Zimmermans came back and they said, hey, we can handle your writ, but you need a writ specialist. And they made recommendations. And I wound up hiring Randy Schaefer, who's well known as a writ lawyer. And he's a good lawyer. He's a fantastic lawyer, but we personally didn't get along. He didn't like policemen. But, then he filed my state writ habeas corpus, denied. And the judge I had instead dragged this out for 3.5 years. She wouldn't sign any documents. Even though the Court of Criminal Appeals was ordering her to have evidentiary hearings, calling witness, she wouldn't do anything. Nothing. She said, I don't care. I've had this. Her exact words, my lawyer said, she said, I've had this fucking case for 14 years at that point. She said, I don't do shit. They can't make me do shit. She did. So she just sat on it. And so, so we lost
And
the
this
state.
may sound, sorry to interject, but
Yeah.
I think when people are hearing this, they may be shocked, but at the same time, I believe it takes around 13 years for people on average to get exonerated in these cases.
Well, see, if you see like people getting out of, I've been in 15, 20 years, their appeals are long gone. They file appeals and they first get locked up, or lawyers where you're going after whole different things at that end, which I'm doing now. Going after a partner or filing an actual writ of actual innocence, And then my writ lawyer, we lost the state habeas corpus. We filed, that was a 1107, they call it. Then he filed a federal 2254 federal writ of habeas corpus. That dragged on for a couple of years. And then we lost that. And I remember he came and saw me in prison, man. And he said, hey, we lost. I said, what's the next step? And we filed COA, a certificate of appealability, to get into the federal appellate court, which here the Fifth Circuit in Louisiana, New Orleans. Filed that, and the judges never even saw that. It didn't pass the clerks. They denied. You have to file that writ, to get a certificate to get before them. So he came and saw me again. And I said, what now? I've been in prison 8 years at this point, I guess. 7 years, 8 years.
8 years.
Well, he came back the last time and he told me, he said, our only hope now is a Supreme Court. He said, it's going to cost $1 million and you have basically zero chance. I said, so what are you going to do? He said, nothing. I said, you're going to fucking abandon me in here? That's what you're going to do? Leave me in here? Yeah. He turned around and walked off.
So during this 8 years, because 8 years is an extremely long time, and I think that can you kind of give us some background of what's going on in day-to-day prison life? Like, how are you treated? You gave us those examples of kind of that first day when you're locked in that cell and you're essentially looking for a way out. Is that the same feeling that you have? Are you are you being treated well by the other prisoners?
No.
Are there death threats on
Yeah.
your life there? Like, what is life like inside prison being a former police officer or sheriff's deputy?
Actually, man, it was crazy. I had a lot of issues with command staff people. And because there's other books written, whatever, and there was other documentaries what were going on, all the guards knew, you know. And then I did run into people I'd sent to prison, you know.
Are
And
they trying to fight you, or like what's going
no,
on?
it was actually it was everyone not no, it wasn't a lot. There was like maybe four, you know, and some of my brother had sent to prison. But those guys, they looked at it like it was cool, like I'd gone to the dark side to be one of them, you know. And there wasn't really about, you know, the big deal with that aspect of it. But because, you know, being you know, a white guy, you know, I always had the same haircut I have now, you know, clean cut, articulate, educated guy from and being a police officer, shooting at something from Houston nonetheless, and shooting a suspect, and then it was a white female. So that pretty much put the crosshairs on me. And out of prisoners, mainly it was the Aryans that I had the most issues with because it was a white female. I ran into a guy who's in the White Knights, and he was a Marine, and I got jammed up in anyway, medium custody. He got out 2 hours a day for 86 guys to shower, eat, watch TV, and wreck. And the two of us would talk. You know, he's from East Texas. He was a good dude, but he was a White Knight, which is like in their realm. That's like the upper level white separatist guys, whatever. But he went down to the law library and looked up my case one day, and I came back in. I was in the shower. We had showers in the dorms, and he came in. He looked at me. He said, "I need to talk to you. You got a shower." So I was like, "Man, here we go," you know. And so I got out. And he goes, "Hey, I asked you what happened." And I said, "You know what, man? I'm gonna tell you a fucking thing, dude." But he was a Marine. My son was a Marine, still, you know. And I had to go report this guy. So I told him a 10-minute version, and then he made an appropriate comment. And he told me that the Aryan Brotherhood was going to kill me that night because of that. And he went to bat for me, you know. And then and then my issues were guards mainly, ranking guards. And then the only time I've been asked that, the only time I wasn't ever scared. I watched my back. But most time, when the first unit I went to, I was going to sell a little guy, and he died. A long story, but sure. I gave him CPR for an hour. The guards did nothing. They let him die in my arms. I'd been locked up 90 days maybe. So they put him in solitary confinement. They moved me to a unit, PAC unit, close, about an hour and a half from Houston. And that's where they sent prison guards and police officers. There were some judges there, a couple of federal agents. So that's where we went, you know. But I wasn't there for a few years. And then, but when I left there, man, because a warden came in to work there, and he was a bully, man, doing brutal, illegal stuff to inmates. I bucked up to him. That led to some federal lawsuits, federal charges, criminal, back and forth. And that started ball rolling. And then, but what saved me in there? I was in there, and I looked up in March 2002, and on March of 2013, my mom and dad were dying. Terrible diseases, lost all appeals. I lost all hope. Hang on, this is why I gotta take a shot of water. It choked up on this one.
No, go ahead. Take your time.
But I had lost hope in everything, you know. And then I knew legally that, and mind you, I got 20-year sentence. Only had to do 5 years for parole. I was under court of law. And because the prosecutors went there and told the jurors that I'd have it easy because of who I was, my family, and I'd be taken care of, which being in my position made prison exponentially more dangerous and difficult for any other inmate. But at this point, I've been denied parole 5, 6 times. And then I was out of hope. I didn't know what to do. You know, I literally wrote for years. I got a prison typewriter, typed thousands of letters. Nobody's listening to anything, you know. And then finally, I sent 2 letters, Hail Mary letters, and one was to Ray Hunt. He still is executive director of the Houston Police Union. Back then, he was the president of the union, and I'd gone to the academy with his brother now 40 years ago. And I'd met his dad. He came out to our ranch hunting a couple of times, and so I just wrote a letter. I said, "Hey, man, you know, I'm your brother's, you know, academy, Norwood Patrol, his brother." And I said, "I'm still one of you guys. I'm one of your brothers in blue." And I said, I said, I'm in trouble. I need help. You know, I sent that letter to Ray, and I sent one to the Texas Rangers, just Hail Mary letters, and they got them, And then I think Ray, when he got his, he called my dad's like, what the hell's going on, And Ray started making phone calls, and he was like convinced I was, something was going on. So Ray came and saw me, and I told him, what had happened. And he told me, he said, man, he said, this is the best human I've ever met in my entire life, this guy. And he said, he said, when I got your letters, I thought Ray doesn't cuss, but he did this one time, I heard. He said, I thought you're full of shit, man. He said, and I started making calls, talked to his brother and people at HPD, people at SO, getting the same stories of what happened, And then he told me later that when he walked out of that meeting at the prison, he went out and got in his car. The front of the prison, got a cell phone and called Brian Binkin, my union lawyer, because they knew each other, after all these years. And he told me, he asked Brian, he said, I'm going to give you one name. I said, guilt or innocence? And he said, Joseph Kent McGowen. And he said, Brian, Brian said he's lost sleep for 25 years. He says, innocent, 100% innocent, And they'd all known this all these years, And then the Texas Rangers got it. It bounced from, I think, like Brenham, Dallas, Austin, and finally lands in Company A, the Texas Rangers in Houston, on the right desk. This Ranger named Val. And then he called my dad, what's going on, man? Then my dad told Val, the Ranger, I'm going to say his last name, but a very well-known Ranger. And so Val came and started coming up meeting with me. And for 4.5 years, they looked into this. What the hell's going on? At this point, people are leaking information, and that's some of these documents we have now. We're leaking documents to everybody. And then and during this time period right there, my favorite aunt passed away. And my mom passed away, and then my uncle was married to that aunt, passed away. Then my dad passed away, and my son passed away, and then my sister-in-law, who I adored since I was a kid, she passed away. So it was a rough time, And then my dad put a reward on the internet for what little he knew about technology and social media, whatever. And it puts out like 3 days later, Dan Cogdell shows up at the prison, I hadn't heard a word from that.
What was the reward for?
He put $1 million reward on the internet for anybody could lead, anybody come forward with information that would lead to my exoneration. And then 3 days later, Cogdell shows up, unannounced. Warden comes, a really good warden at this point, Donnie Bilnowski. He came and got me, and he said, here's, you got a lawyer visit. And it was December 14th. It was raining, cold. And I'm like walking in the rain with him. I said, who is it? And he says, the guy was chauffeur-driven limousine guy. And I thought it was Dick DeGuerin or somebody, He goes, no, it's a guy named Cogdell. I said, Cogdell, Dan Cogdell? And he said, yeah. I was like, what? And so I go in there, and there's Cogdell in his Armani suit, whatever, and his presidential Rolex, and his famous golden girl's butt cufflinks. And he had a portfolio. I said, what the hell are you doing here, man? He said, look, I'm here to get your innocent ass out of here. He goes, I've already got it. He started naming off these big name private investigators and stuff. I already got them working on your case for months. And it was his portfolio. And I see the front page was a print-up of that website, my dad had posted. And I said, well, I guess you're here for the money, right? Oh, what money? He goes, oh, I'm not going to take a penny. I'm doing this to help you out. And then lied. That was on a Thursday. And my parents were so excited, and both of them were terminally ill. Their driver brought them to come see me. And that's the last time I ever saw my mom. And then she passed away in February. Yeah. But for like 3 or 4 years, Dan just lied and lied and lied and lied to everybody. Lied to the Texas Rangers, lied to everybody. And then he got hired by Ken Paxton, the Attorney General, now running for senator. That story just went crazier after that, what went on. And how connections, no names mentioned, but some calls were made because the Texas Rangers started asking me about some of that stuff going on. All of a sudden, Texas Rangers disappear. They just, after 4.5 years, they just nothing.
Well, so let's try to get back on track here. So we've got your dad is offering this reward. You're still sitting. You've got family members, including your parents, that are passing away.
Right.
And are you I assume that you're just losing hope at that point. At
Yes.
what point is there a resolution to this?
What saved me was Ray Hunt. Ray and I were texting a couple of days ago because I would have never made it through there. I mean, physically, you
Right.
know. So at this point, man, I had the Mexican mafia. There was a number of hits after whatever, and Ray knew who to call, you know. And I would call my wife, and she'd call Ray. I mean, they'd come get me in an hour's time and move into another unit. With stuff would flare up. I would. It's a miracle I was not murdered in there, or far worse.
So you're getting death threats from the Mexican mafia and at one
Aryans and
point
other
the
stuff.
Aryan Brotherhood, which are both, the top 2 prison gangs
Mm,
in the country, really. A- And you've got someone that's actually helping you get moved. That
right.
way you can't be killed.
Yeah, there was a number of attempts, and this one they said the Mexican mafia sent a guy after me, and it was done by the guards because I started getting into some of the higher ranking people at TDC over illegal stuff, you know. I mean, they would try to jam me up on bogus disciplinary cases. Then lawsuits started flying, whatever. And they would mainly it was the ranking TDC people would fire up these guys. The only place that I was the most seriously concerned about my safety was when I got stuck at the Hughes unit. I was supposed to pass through there and change from one bus to another. And it's a level 5 maximum security. The Hughes unit, if TDC cannot control you, that's where they send you, is to that unit. Man, I was stuck there 9 months. The federal judge sent the marshal to come get me off that place because I had a lawsuit going against this warden, whatever. He wound up being the warden there. They put me in a cell with this guy he was about 6 inches bigger than me, outweighing about 100 pounds. And he was in there for killing 4 white people. And, he was an African American guy. They rolled the door during count because in count they locked everybody up. So they knew I couldn't refuse going in. And shut that door, and that dude looks at me. He goes, "I know." He goes, "You're that motherfucking lawman out of Harris County." So here we go again, man. But that wasn't uncommon. That was not an uncommon event. Uh, some people they try to force me in, but see, I always had that card I could throw. I'd say, "Hey, man," all I had to say is, get like a lieutenant or somebody, who has some snap, and I'd say, "Hey, that dude over there recognized me from somewhere." So they put me in solitary confinement. I'm sitting there for a few days, and they tried to throw me back in. I'd refuse, and some calls were being made, and I'm telling you, Ray Hunt saved my life. That man saved me physically, emotionally, and he was the one giving me the hope.
At what point do you get out of prison?
Yeah, well, that was on my 10th time up for parole. I had like a year, a little less than a year. And I've been denied for 15 years. I've been denied parole. This is my 8th time coming up on parole. And in Texas, it's not like other states where you sit in front of a board of 5 or 7 people, and I did this or I didn't do it or whatever. Not in Texas. They don't give a shit. You don't get to talk to your voters. So very rarely. And over the years, they saw me 3 times. And in 2001, I came up again, and because of COVID going on, they got me into a private unit out of TDC. I mean, a private unit, and really good staff there, man. The major, his name was Kenneth. I forget his last name. But anyway, he comes and gets me, and he said, "Hey, Pearl wants to talk to you." Because of COVID, it was on a computer, right? So Major brings me his office, said, "Hey, sit in my chair, man," and he had a computer in front of me, and he said, he goes, "She'll come on in a minute," and leaves me in his office by myself. A couple minutes later, the computer pops up, and it's looked like somebody, your mom or somebody, and she said, she called me Kent, which my name is Joseph Kenton, but she called me Kent, which I knew, but I was already laid out to her. And she goes, "How you doing, Kent?" I said, "All right." She goes, "Can you hear me?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." I guess 'cause I had a stupid look on my face. I said, "Can you hear me?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "I've never talked on a computer before." She kind of laughed, said, "Guess you haven't." And I didn't get to start my spiel on her, man. She said, "Look," she goes, "I know what's happened to you in prison, you know." And she said, how you wound up in prison, you know. And she said, "I'm going to give you an FI1, which means an immediate release." And I told her, I said, because it takes 2 voters. And I said, "Well, no, you gave me a 1-year set off last time, and the other one." She goes, "Don't, call's been made. We know what's happened. We're going to get you out of here." And then she goes, do you know why you've been denied parole 9 times for 15 years? And I said, I have my suspicions. She goes, well, do you know what Steve Clapper and John Denholm, the DA investigating homicide lieutenant? I said, yeah, they're going to set me up. She goes, they've been calling here for 15 years, telling us, we let you out of here, that you have contracts that I'm killed, and you're going to kill them when you get out of here, which would be understandable, but I would not consider it. I don't know what they've done to us. But
Right.
she said that's why. And it still took 86 days to get me out because they were calling and raising hell. Finally, I get out on July 14th of 21, and Ray Hunt and his brother, another HPD officer, picked me up, And because of COVID, I had not seen sun in 17 months, right? So I walk out and it was totally bizarre. Ray brought me some, some tennis shoes and blue jeans and a button-up shirt. I was like, this is crazy, And I walked out and the 3 people on there was my son, my mom, and my dad, And when you're locked up, you have to just like put that stuff behind you because you'll go insane in there, And so I walked out kind of looking for them. I knew they weren't there, but I was thinking, well, maybe I was misunderstood or whatever. They weren't there, of course. And I made to about 15 feet from Ray. I lost it. But they came and got me out, And then I got out on Wednesday, and the next morning I had to be at my parole officer in Harris County in Houston. That was a wake up. See, when I was going to the parole office, what the hell, fighting and whatever. But because of my case, I had 2 parole officers assigned to me, and the lady, Tracy Long, was the parole commissioner, let me out. She said, "Hey, no restrictions, nothing. You'll be on this for a few months, just lay low." So, all right. But when I'm leaving, actually, before I leave the prison, parole's there, and they gave me an ankle monitor, put all these restrictions on me. I was literally under house arrest, could not even step out of the front door. And then I go to my parole officer and I say, "Hey, why do I have this?" It's called SISP, Super Intensive Supervision Program. I said, "I don't care. You can chain me to a tree and throw a water burger at me once a day. Just get me the hell out of here, My parole officer said, "Look, man," she said, you're the only reason you have that's your flag in case, God forbid, something happens to you. We don't think you're in any danger. You're going to do anything stupid or crazy, but in case something happens to you, you're flagged. So you got 8 months on this. Just lay low." So, all right. And she goes, I've been getting calls for 2 weeks about you getting out. And I've had senators and congressmen and police and all these people on both sides, And she said, all these documentaries. I said, yeah, I've never seen them or heard. She goes, no, she said, you see that guy just left my office? I said, yeah. She goes, that's a guy, some producer asking me about doing a documentary about you. And I said, what'd you tell him? She said, "Tell him to get the hell out of my office, But I laid low for 8 months. And then I know you're getting short of time, but I'll make this quick.
No, well, you can go as long as you want.
Well, the guys who got me out, and there was an elected official. I'm going to say his name, but he and Ray saved me, man. They saved me, And then anyway, get me out, and they said, "Man, I've never seen a phone. Hey, we're gonna get you a phone, but don't Google yourself. Don't Google Cogdale. Don't. I didn't know what Google was. I never seen a phone. None of this stuff. Facebook. None of this. And so they give me a phone, and then I got out in July, and like January, I was talking to a friend of mine that I trained a long time ago, and he slipped and said something about Clapper and Denholm. And so, of course, I Googled them. That just threw me. I was like, what's happened to them being nationally disgraced and all they've done? But I laid low. I got off parole on March 10th of 2022. Got off parole. And I've been hollering and screaming this whole time. During that time period, I learned how to use Facebook, work on, get the computer going. And then,
so what's the ultimate goal here? Because I was talking to Jerry about this, and that is that you've been through just a complete shitstorm for decades, and you're finally a free man. You're out. You could lay low and try to have an easy life. I mean, you've been through a lot, and I think a lot of people would do that. But for you, looks like we lost him for a second. So what I was trying to get at is that with Kent, he has spent a lot of his life that's just been completely torn apart. And he's talked about the emotional toll that's taken on him and his family and I'm sure that financially this has been very hard as well. But he's chose to, instead of taking the easy way, to try to get the story out there. And I feel like this is not about a financial issue. This is more about clearing his name and being able to, um,
Can you hear me?
I can. I was just going on a little soapbox about how I think that why you're doing this is that,
To let my
it's not
laptop
about just,
overheated. Can you hear me?
yep. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? All right, I'm going to wrap this up.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I
You gotta
can
be
hear you.
kidding me.
You know what, Jerry? Sorry, Jerry, Kent. I'm just going to wrap this up because I know that you're having some technical difficulties, but to say the least, that Kent does not have to do anymore, but instead he's been trying to clear his name and he's trying to get the story out there. We talked about
I
the
can't hear you at
narrative.
all. It went dead.
It's okay. We talked about the narrative before um the show started, about how the narrative so far is that there's this young nurse that he's been having an affair with, and that he, during a more or less jealous rage, he went and assassinated her during this warrant service, which is completely absurd. And I think that when you look back at what we know actually happened, we know that that's not true. Like he was saying before, he had only seen her 3 times in his life, and we've talked about all the things that are really stupid that happened if your goal is going to be to murder someone. Again, I wanted to thank Kent for coming on. I'm going to put a link to his Facebook group, as well as I think he's got a GoFundMe page. I'll talk to him off the air once he gets his technical issues taken care of. Thank you all for coming on and listening to this. This was one of our longer shows. If you would like to support Santana True Crime, you can start off by liking and subscribing. We also now have a membership for $1.95 a month. You can be a member, support the show. What that gets you is early access to our pre-recorded shows. It also gets you a weekly, it's kind of an update of what's going to come out that week, as well as stories that we're working on that are going to come out in the next month or two. So it's a way to get you involved and be a part of this community that we have. Another thing that you can do if you're interested is you can pick up my book, A Murder on Campus, A Professor the Cop in North Carolina's Most Notorious Cold Case. I wrote that with my brother, Dr. Brian Santana. You can pick that up at anywhere that books are sold, to include Audible and Kindle. And if you're in to the show a lot, you can pick up some true crime merch. We've got hats now, shirts. I put a lot more stuff. That's an older mug. I've got a better one. But again, Kent, thank you so much for coming on, and good night.